Everything around them compelled them to bow down, to kneel before the emperor. The statues loomed over us with their enormous size, as if trying to control the will of anyone who came too close to the emperor's palace. They demand that all the grace that has come down from heaven, and all the praise that has been directed to heaven be gathered, and to do so, to bow down. It seemed impossible not to obey their will. Soldiers waved their axes so that no one could contradict the will of the emperor, and the sacred will of this entire place. But now the soldier's weapon is crumbling, and he himself is about to depart for the next world. However, there were dozens, even hundreds of such knights, and all of them would unquestioningly obey any order of the emperor. However, there was one man who went against the orders. He did not bow his knee. Moreover, he pierced with his sword all the soldiers who tried to force him to submit. This man is the leader of an organization widely known as the Special Forces, an organization that exists solely to protect Emperor Leon Cavalan. And today, the leader of the Special Forces, Yang, has come to destroy the emperor. The knights begged him to kneel, but their pleas fell on deaf ears, for Yan was prepared to give his life to achieve his goal. The soldiers had no intention of surrendering. They tried to destroy the troublemaker at all costs, but they were no match for the commander of the squad, who was directly under the emperor's command. Chaos reigned around the castle. The fire turned the ground into a veritable inferno. Inside, everything was calm and harmonious. Only the sounds of explosions disturbed the tranquility of the place. The little fairy hovering cautiously over the hand of the majestic Leon Cavalan was slightly alarmed by these sounds, but the emperor did not consider them a problem. And now he was standing face to face with the leader of his squad. He was most concerned that he could not understand why his most loyal subject had decided to betray him. So much time had passed since John became the leader, but the emperor still remembered him as a recruit. He remembered how, on a special training ground called the Bottomless Pit of Loneliness, this boy had gone all the way from a slave soldier to a leader. So why did he betray him now? Why, when he had everything? So the emperor asked him what he was dissatisfied with, to which he received a short but very eloquent answer. He was dissatisfied that Leon Cavalan still had his head on his shoulders. First, Yang took the ugly lizard out of his ear and got rid of it. In fact, not everything the emperor said was true. Not only did he not get everything, but because of his service, he lost everything he had before. Jan began to say that he had lost the most precious thing, but then Leon's nerves began to give way. The mask of a good ruler fell from his face, revealing his true self. But the leader was not going to stop listing his losses, for he had suffered greatly. He had lost his memories, his family, his identity, and even his life. The emperor refused to listen any further. He bit off the little fairy's head, revealing his true nature. Leon quickly thrust his long sword straight into his leader's heart. The latter did not even have time to move. The emperor was a little surprised that Yang had figured everything out, but overall, he was more offended. He finished off Yang with the words that he had been his favorite toy. That was how he had wasted his life, and that was all that flashed through Yang's mind. But then, from somewhere, someone began to call him. A bright silhouette told him to get up. But how? His heart had been pierced. How could he still be alive? When he came to, the main character saw a place that looked very familiar. Right in front of him, in the middle of a large square, he saw a huge pillar. It turned out to be a huge stone sword. Its size was impressive. This sword was the symbol of the Special Forces training ground. Thousands of recruits had once laid down their lives before this stone sword. Despite all this, his body had changed in an amazing way. He had become younger. He quickly recognized the clothes he was wearing. It was the uniform of those same recruits. He had no time to think about what it all meant. From behind, he heard someone preparing to attack him. He somehow managed to parry the attacker's heavy blow but was thrown against a rock. The attacker shouted that he should have been more careful. He shouldn't have been distracted in the middle of a fight. The attacker turned out to be recruit number 12 of the Special Forces unit, Roman. Yan began to get to his feet. Roman was a little surprised. He had thought he would quickly deal with this guy. While the main character couldn't figure out how they ended up on the training ground, Roman explained that he just wanted to get rid of Yan, because in his opinion, no one would care if he took the life of a low-level loser. Here, Yan was completely convinced, although it was very hard to believe, but the way Roman behaved, his emaciated body, and his large stone sword. Everything pointed to the fact that he had returned to the past. To be honest, he didn't care why it happened. The only thing that mattered was that now he would start from scratch, and this time he would destroy the emperor. After thinking it over, Yang told Roman that he wanted to tell him something important. Recruit number 12 listened and was initially frozen in shock. He was told that he would not experience love until he was 40. Roman simply exploded. He rushed at Yan, but Yan easily dodged his fist. He couldn't believe that he had been so pathetic in the past that he had missed such a slow punch. Realizing that his fist had missed its target, he used one of his best attacks, the Dark Soul of the 7th type, Tiger Leopard's Lair. Although the attack was not bad, he easily dodged it, and he decided to give Roman one piece of advice. He needed to close the distance and just attack. Yang demonstrated such a blow on Roman himself. His attack was called Dark Soul of the 7th type, Sunset. Roman was immediately thrown back and was unable to continue the fight. It was impossible to describe Roman's surprise that a mid-level recruit had such skills. Yang planned to continue his attack immediately, but his attention was drawn to a mysterious pendant. He couldn't remember anything like this from the past, and this time he spared recruit number 12. Roman was really lucky. It seemed that there was something inside. He tried to open the lid and it came off easily. There was an old photograph of him as a child and some man and woman. The main character was sure he had never seen them before, but they'd looked so familiar. Could this be his family? Overcome with emotion, tears streamed down his cheeks. For 30 years, he had not thought about words such as memories, love, and family. This was something he couldn't get even when he burned down the capital of the empire. Even after taking the lives of so many soldiers, he still couldn't find them, and now they were right there in his hands. At that moment, he realized one important thing. He almost made the same mistake he had made in the past. Yang realized that he couldn't waste his life on revenge. He had to escape from here. His confidence knew no bounds. Yang would get everything back. He would get back the life he had lost. He would get his family back. Under the command of Emperor Leon Kavalan, the Special Forces successfully completed many missions. These were both large and small tasks, but the most famous of these were the fall of Fortress Berna, and the most famous was the destruction of the Grand Duke of the Northern Continent. This unit directly influenced the fate of the Empire for several years. And at the head of all this chaos stood Yang, commander of the Special Forces unit. This frail recruit was the Emperor's right hand and the Empire's first knight. How he became the one who carries away other people's excrement is unknown to anyone. Usually 2 recruits fight each other during training. More than 1,000 recruits take part in special training. In this place, people send each other to the other world to save their own lives and become stronger. On average, about 3 people died here every day. Their places were taken by volunteers or kidnapped new recruits. A dragon's nest in the northwestern mountains served as a training ground. It was a place that resembled a labyrinthine dungeon. Each recruit was assigned a number that reflected their abilities. Candidates could improve their rating by passing an exam or winning a competition. The higher the number in the ranking table, the better the attitude towards the recruit. New recruits try to lower each other's ratings by stepping on each other's heads. In this structure, it is almost impossible for the lowest ranked recruits to survive. Even if a recruit dies, another will simply take his place. They are usually treated as labor or training material. Yun can be said to be lucky because he was classified as labor material. Thinking about this, he bumped into someone. Several of the boxes he was carrying fell and almost opened. The person he bumped into turned out to be one of the best recruits, Lorena. Even her clothes were completely different from his. Despite her higher status, she politely apologized. The senior recruits were heirs to the imperial nobility. They joined the training for their own reasons. Sometimes it's to control other families, other times it's just because they're loyal to the empire. The training ground administration always ensures their comfort. Also, due to the privileges of the aristocracy, they are not subjected to lizard training. The best recruits receive benefits and privileges and remain at the top of the rankings. Some of these recruits were Cruel Dwight, Casa Ephraim, and Lorena Beowulf. This trio was at the top of the rankings throughout the selection process. But another senior recruit really didn't like how Lorena treated them. Cruel Dwight thought people lower than him were just trash. He believed that commoners did not even have the right to speak to them. Cruel mocked January. The future commander of the best squad was already boiling with anger, but he held back. Instead of showing his true strength, he apologized. But one of the top 3 wasn't satisfied with that. He spat the toothpick he had been holding in his teeth right into Jan's face. He didn't even consider Jan a human being. He demanded that he beg for mercy. In his mind, Jan was already wiping that smug smile off his face. He thought about how cool it would be to trample all the pride out of this arrogant man. But in real life, he held back. He understood how important it was not to give in to the provocations of the nobility at that moment. When Cruel grew tired of mocking him, Casa and Frain had already finished packing all of Jan's boxes, and they left as if nothing had happened. Jan didn't care about Cruel's behavior. He knew it was even better for him. Passing by a dark corner, he sensed that someone was hiding there. His instincts could not fail him. Maybe it was Roman, but his senses told him that wasn't the case. He decided to pretend he didn't notice anything and just walk by. But then Lorena Beowulf stepped out of the shadows. She was waiting for him. The most wanted criminal whom even the Knights of the Empire could not catch was called Iron Fist Gald. At the age of 20, he had already assembled a band of robbers who went on to destroy 23 villages and 17 guilds. At 11, he committed his first fatal assault. The mere sight of his fist struck terror into people's hearts. But Lorena Beowulf arrested him simply by taking him by the same hand. This secured her the position of commander of the Imperial Palace Knights. The Beowulf Dukes are one of the 4 great noble families who rule the snow-covered mountain region of Bokbong. The Dukes believe that Lorena was born to become the best swordsman on the continent. This young swordsman is the best the Beowulf family has ever produced. Jan was deeply surprised that she was addressing him. He knew better than to mess with her, especially when she was his enemy. She paid no attention to this, only asking what his goal was and why he was hiding his true strength. This was what Jan feared. Now Lorena Beowulf was a problem for him, and he would have to deal with her first. The guy didn't give up. He continued to act dumb, trying not to give himself away. But Lorena had seen his fight with Roman. When the girl saw his skills, she couldn't believe her eyes. She thought he was weak, but his technique stood out from the rest, so she couldn't understand why he was still at the lowest rank. Yang immediately realized what a mistake he had made, but he continued to insist that he didn't understand what she was talking about. Hearing this, Lorena seemed to accept her mistake and held out her hand for a handshake, but then she quickly redirected it toward Yang's face. He saw everything. It took him only a split second to realize that this was a test and to decide not to dodge it. The boy let himself be hit, thus proving to the girl that all her suspicions were wrong. Now all he had to do was play his part well. He pretended to be in great pain like never before. Beowulf was very surprised that he didn't block her blow. She even seemed disappointed. Jan knew what kind of person Lorena was. He played on her guilt to get her to help him carry the boxes, and it worked. As they walked together, she suggested they talk informally since they were now of equal status, but Jan refused. She also said that she didn't think higher-ranking recruits should treat weaker ones like slaves. She said that if she became a ruler, she would defend the rights of slaves on her land. At that moment, Jan could only think about how talkative she was. When they delivered everything to its destination, he thanked her. She was about to leave. But in the end, Lorena stayed and decided to express her thoughts. She suspects that he saw her attack and that is why he did not repel it. The girl had no intention of leaving him. She would follow him, although she hoped she was wrong. Jan was not surprised by her words. He expected her to be perceptive, but then maybe it would be better to get rid of her now before it became a problem. But becoming an enemy of the Beowulf family just to deal with this girl was too stupid an idea. First, he had to escape from here. Even when he was a commander, there were deserters. Most of them never made it off the training grounds, but there was one who did. He was found in the woods nearby. Jan was able to find out how he did it. In the 3rd section, in the 5th toilet, there is an exit behind the wall. Yang went to the right place and destroyed the wall behind the toilet. He found it. The deserter hadn't lied. There was a passage behind the wall. The hole he made was still too narrow, but if he widened it, he might be able to squeeze through. He would finally escape from here. He would leave this place where his life was torture. A little later in the evening, roll call was held, and then it was time for number 974. But when his name was called, he did not answer. The man conducting the roll call thought that he must have escaped, but no, he was just resting and was a little late in answering. While carrying out his mission, Jan understood something. The more careful you are, the higher the probability of success. Jan had only one chance. Even if he managed to escape, the entire guard would pursue him. And if he made a mistake, he would become a terrifying example for other recruits. He needed a trump card that would be an unpredictable change in the game. But that will be quite difficult with the body he has now. However, he has no choice. So he decided to start training. To begin with, he started to control his chakra using dragon breathing. This is a unique method available only to outstanding geniuses. He had all the knowledge, but his body was not yet ready. He tried to create a core for his mana. There was not enough time to create a core using only dragon breath, but there was no other choice. When he started, the flow of mana was much faster than Yang had expected. Every cell in his body emitted mana. His body literally glowed. It felt as if a dragon had entered his body. The divine dragon breath was a secret technique of the first emperor. He conquered many countries with only a sword and founded his own empire. It was a very powerful technique that the emperor had created in a state of apathy. Yang couldn't get enough of how wonderful this technique was. But then it dawned on him. That mana could leave the core. This could not be allowed to happen under any circumstances. He tried. He made every effort to prevent this from happening. But the mana went beyond the core. And in the middle of the night, other recruits who were looking at the light shining through the bars heard terrifying screams. He realized what a mistake he had made. It was impossible to create a core with inadequate leadership for this technology. His body was still too weak. It couldn't withstand such a load. Once, Leon revealed the secret of this technique to him. It is unknown whether it was a momentary whim or whether he was testing the boy. But the book the Emperor gave him contained only information on how to collect mana and nothing about its concentration. The secret technique was still unfinished, but now Jan needed to focus on escaping before it started. The next day, many recruits were forced to come to the square. Some said that everyone gathered there would be disqualified. The main character was also there. But he knew for sure that it was all nonsense. No one was ever allowed to leave here. Jan remembered that he was coming here today. He had to do everything he could to make sure that whoever came didn't notice him. Roman was there too. He tried with all his might to find Jan, and Jan tried with all his might to prevent this. The instructor appeared. He was immediately bombarded with questions about whether they would all be able to return home today. The man paused for a few seconds as if he were really thinking about the question. Then he shouted so loudly for everyone to shut up that they all froze. It didn't sound like a normal voice. Young realized that it was the voice of mana, a technique for adding mana to the voice. Some people suffer fatal injuries just from hearing it. That's what happened to some people. Their hearts just stopped beating. But the instructor didn't care. He just kept saying what worthless trash was standing in front of him. Young quickly recognized this deranged man, although he had hoped never to see him again. He was the chief instructor for training people for the Special Purpose Unit, Damien. The administration began to gather those who had passed away from the voice of mana. They were simply dragged across the ground. They shouted for everyone to line up quickly because the instructor was watching them. Yang understood that now he had to be as careful as possible so as not to attract the instructor's attention. Because if he noticed you, even escape wouldn't save you. You could say goodbye to life right then and there. To the instructor, all the recruits were just toys. And then the instructor began his speech. He said how glad he was to see everyone, then called them trash with no status or power. There were even threats of being sent to the other world. Yang understood that this was no joke. But then he changes his mood again. His expression becomes cheerful and friendly once more. Damien tells them not to worry. After all, even such clumsy people can be useful to the Emperor. They are given a chance to participate in the Dragon Soldier project. Those who are chosen will protect the Emperor. But in reality, this project is designed to turn recruits into obedient puppets. They are brainwashed by implanting parasites into them. Without orders, they cannot even die. This was the case when Yang burned the capital. Damien ended his speech by saying how great their Emperor was, and that they should be grateful for the opportunity they had been given. At the end, he demanded thunderous applause from the recruits as a sign of respect for the Emperor. Yang understood how important it was for him to be inconspicuous, and to make every effort to achieve this. But some had no sense of self-preservation at all, and he decided to ask the instructor a question. It turned out to be Roman. He was interested in whether this dragon squad was really that important. The instructor doubted that he would be selected for such a project. Roman immediately exploded. He was angry that someone thought of him as a weak fighter. But suddenly, a bright ray struck his heart. Roman began to fall backward. Yan recognized this attack as Tanjigan's. It was the ability that allowed one to shoot bullets from their fingers. The instructor who attacked him then asked if Roman was okay. He believed that nonsense was coming out of his dirty mouth. He didn't care about the fate of the recruits. To him, everyone here was just a freeloader. The crowd surrounded Roman. Everyone whispered about whether he was dead or not. Jan understood that he could still save him by stopping the bleeding, but it was too dangerous to step forward now. However, Roman got up even after the instructor's attack. He boasted about it and had no intention of giving up. On the contrary, he became even more aggressive. He did not like being called a freeloader and expressed this loudly. To survive in the slums, Roman had to do any dirty work and endure humiliation. But even after all that, he still wanted to live. The Emperor, the Dragon Squad, it didn't matter. He tells them straight out that they must defend their precious Emperor themselves. Damien listened to Roman. He even recognized him as a strong freeloader. However, to the instructor, he was like a cockroach. If you cut off its head, it would continue to live. The instructor planned to attack again. He was curious to see if Roman could withstand it. But then, unexpectedly, a crystal mole appeared from somewhere. A wild rodent that had once been found in the mountain dungeons. Despite its cute appearance, it has a bad reputation. This is because they are hunted. They have the ability to explode and blind with their light. Damien was alarmed that this crystal mole had appeared right here. After being blinded, Roman fell again. At first, they wanted to drag him away and destroy him. But his stubbornness, like that of a cockroach, even impressed the instructor, so he ordered them to leave him alone. Then Jan was finally able to breathe a sigh of relief because he had helped to ensure that Roman was left alone. It was he who let the mole go, although now he regretted having to do it. The main character found it by accident in the bathroom, and then he decided to keep it. He wasn't going to use it today, he just took it with him just in case. The main problem was the instructor. Jan prayed to all the gods that he wouldn't notice anything. If he got caught, it would be the end of him. However, although he looked pensive, his mood didn't seem too bad at the moment. When everyone had gradually dispersed, Yang approached Roman to count him off like a small child. Damien went to a place where he could be alone. He knew that no one would overhear him there, and now he could finally rejoice that he had found two very exciting toys, one of which was Yang. 3 days of preparations for the escape were in full swing. This time he was not cautious. He didn't even take a mask. Yan dug a tunnel and reinforced it with boards. Nothing particularly bad happened during those 3 days. To see in the tunnel, he strengthened his eyes with mana, so the darkness was not a problem for him. Since it was a deserted place, almost no one came here. At least that was the case for the last 3 days. When he was widening the tunnel with his knife again, he hit something. On the same day, the recruits took turns handing over the barrels they had been carrying. The guard noticed a strange smell coming from recruit number 974. He immediately suspected something was wrong. He told the guy to take off his hood. When Yang took off his hood, everything became clear. It was the smell of shit. He explained that he had accidentally broken the container he was carrying. The supervisor immediately left the recruit alone, telling him to get out of his sight. A little later, when the main character was washing his clothes, trying to get rid of the smell, he remembered how all that waste had actually spilled on him. What he had hit with his knife while digging the tunnel turned out to be a drain pipe. But as long as everything goes according to plan and no one suspects anything, there is no reason to panic. By now, he has managed to gather daggers, ropes, and other tools for his escape. His body is also almost ready, although the training was very difficult. However, it paid off. Here, Yang overheard a conversation between 2 other recruits, which interrupted his train of thought. He decided to eavesdrop. They were discussing that you couldn't even laugh in front of the instructor, otherwise you could lose your tongue. But there were rumors that the instructor would soon be leaving, so they only had to hold out a little longer. For a future escapee, this was wonderful news that he had been waiting for a long time. He couldn't miss this opportunity, so he went back to his hiding place. He had to finish all his work before the instructor returned, but then he heard footsteps. Someone was coming out. Millions of possibilities raced through Jan's mind. Most of all, he was worried that it was Lorena or the instructor, that his plan had been discovered. But his surprise knew no bounds when he saw Roman standing in front of him. During their initial argument, Roman tried to prove that he was already better. The blood was just pimples. Jan let slip that he had a lot of work to do and that it was time for him to go. Roman replied that he understood everything because he wanted to run away. This made the hero really nervous. Roman did not stop there. He said directly that he would tell the instructors everything. At that moment, Yang took out his dagger and used the 16th Dark Spirit technique. Roman only had time to say that he didn't understand who Jan was. Then he immediately fell apart into pieces. That was exactly what Jan wanted to do. That was exactly how he imagined it in his head. The threat had to be eliminated for good. But Roman was still standing there, more alive than anyone else, and continued to mock Jan. He says that maybe if he tries to beg him not to tell anyone, it will remain a secret. However, the boy had no intention of doing so. He was sure that Roman would not tell anyone anything anyway. Because he hates it all even more than Jan. Even when he was a step away from death, he couldn't hide his anger and strong desire to return to his homeland. He simply couldn't want to report my escape to the instructor. He wanted to escape from here more than anyone else. But Roman had something to say in his defense. It's not as simple as it seems. When they were fighting, Roman felt something. If Jan hadn't decided to stop then, he wouldn't be here now. From that day on, he always recognized recruit number 974, even in a crowd. He had a different smell about him. When Jan heard about this, he decided that Roman was just a stalker. First, he followed him to this toilet, and now he's talking about some smell. When the fugitive asked how Roman had found him, he replied that he had followed his tracks. Most of the training ground was made of granite. There were some strange marks with lime dust, and the length of his feet and the size of his steps were exactly the same as Jan's. But it was hard to believe that Roman had figured out his plans based only on these facts. He also looked at the records describing the escape, and Jan often came to this toilet. It turns out that Roman is quite perceptive. You wouldn't think so at first glance. He asked Jan to share his escape plan with him. He asked where the tunnel led and other details. Jan thought that Roman wanted to escape with him, but he wasn't sure yet. He couldn't answer right now. He needed to think it over. In that case, it would be better for him to stay here. With his abilities, in a few years, he could achieve great success here. Yang asked him about the things Roman wanted to protect so badly. But here, they couldn't even be sure of the safety of their own lives. However, the main character interrupted his thoughts. There was no time to think. If he took his side, they would be gone the day after tomorrow. But Roman was not so stupid. He asked Jan if he knew what to do after they escaped. But the question was more rhetorical. He was concerned about something else. He offered to tell Jan about his plan himself. The difference between their ranks was 962 places. And when they escaped, the instructors would first go after those with higher ranks. In Roman's opinion, even if he escaped, he would still end up in a grave. Jan really surprised him with his quick wits. Appearances can often be deceiving. Roman was proof of that. They couldn't decide what to do. Both were taking big risks. In any case, they had no choice. In the evening, Damien gathered most of the recruits at the training ground to make an announcement. He apologized for having to meet them at such a time, but he thought the news was good, so he didn't want to delay. As far as John remembered, the exam was supposed to take place today. He was right. The instructor announced that the schedule for their first exam had finally been finalized. The rules were very simple. Everyone would be sent to a specific location. Those who managed to stay there for a week would take the exam. The Sword Mountains were chosen as the location for the first exam, but Yang already knew what awaited him there, and that was why he was not eager to take this exam again. In the past, there lived an adventurer named Nilf. He wanted to cure his mother at all costs and learned that the medicine he needed was in the Sword Mountains. But all he found there was his own death, and his mother continued to wait for him until her own death. The Devil's Blade Mountains are a refuge for many monsters. The weakest are goblins, but the further you go, the more dangerous the monsters become. It is not uncommon to encounter representatives of larger species there. Giant monsters that we have only encountered in fairy tales all live there. In addition, there are creatures that are completely unknown, and the recruits will have a chance to meet them today. But that's not all. They say that in the very depths of the Sword Mountains lives it. This frightened all the recruits, but the instructor just continued to mock them. He asked if they were burning with impatience. All he cared about was how many of them would be left in a week. Just thinking about how they would die lifted his spirits. One of the administrators approached him. He needed to interrupt him. It was difficult to hear their entire conversation, but it was clear that they needed the instructor to be there. After that, Damien's mood became even worse than usual, so he quickly finished his speech. He said that everyone could leave. No matter how well the junior recruits were trained, they had almost no chance of passing the exam. The senior recruits, who were noblemen, would help them. Then Ms. Lorena appeared from somewhere. She outshone all the low-ranking recruits. She was a real star with her amazing popularity. Even people like that took part in the exam. When Lorena passed by Jan, he simply prayed to all the gods that she would not notice him. But he was unlucky. She noticed him and was so surprised that she even paused for a split second. In Jan's opinion, it was the worst thing that could have happened. But there was no need to worry. He would definitely escape. When Jan asked Roman if he had done everything he asked, he received a satisfactory answer. He asked him to look at the stone sword in front of them. Roman didn't understand what was so annoying about this sword. Then Jan explained that starting tomorrow, he would no longer have to look at this annoying sword. He also said that he knew what message the instructor had received and why he was so dissatisfied. Before the first exam, he needed to meet with the royal family in person and report to the emperor about the situation with the exam. The chief instructor did not like visiting the imperial palace, but he could not disobey. Thus, the main obstacle to the plan was removed. So Yang announced that they would escape that very night. They might not get another chance like this. In the evening, the guard did roll call, and then it was time for number 974. But no one answered. The guard became angry, thinking that he was catching flies again. He was wrong. Someone did answer, but not from behind the bars, but right behind him. It was the last thing he heard in his life. Operation Escape of Jan Roman and 2 other recruits officially began. A new shift was due to arrive soon, so Jan gave the order to hide the body. 2 guys, Jake and Todd, whom Roman had recruited for this operation at Jan's request, obediently agreed to clean everything up. Roman believed that they could be trusted. He was more concerned that Jan would use them as bait. They were all afraid of dying. Some believed in success more than others. Only Jan said nothing about it. He had other things on his mind. He was carrying out his plan. They all stood in front of the large door. Jan admitted that he had called them all to escape together through this very door. The problem was that only 4 people could open them. That was why he needed them. To leave the dormitory and get to the bathroom, you had to open these double doors. To open them, you had to stand on 2 steps in front of the door. Then the other 2 people would go inside and hold the switch from the other side. The 2 people standing on the steps can pass through the door while the other 2 hold the switch. That's why Yang couldn't escape on his own. Roman listened carefully to him. He immediately understood everything and decided that he and Jake would stand on the steps. When he gave the signal, they simultaneously pressed their feet on a slightly protruding stone in the floor. At that moment, the door opened. Everyone was delighted to see them coming out. A note of relief flashed through their minds. The commander of this small operation ordered them to stay on the steps and told Todd to follow him. Yan told Roman that he would give the signal, and they disappeared behind the door. After a while, Roman began to worry. There was still no signal. And then the door suddenly closed. Roman instantly became angry and began banging on the door and shouting. He thought that John had decided to just abandon them, or that he had planned to do so from the very beginning. He began to reproach himself for not understanding everything when Yan had offered to go first. But then the door opened and he heard Yan's voice. He wasn't very happy because he had simply asked him to wait, and Roman hadn't even been able to do that. When Roman saw Yan, the first thing he noticed was the blood. There was a lot of blood on his clothes, and for some reason, the first thing that came to mind was that it was Todd's blood. Jan said that they could relax. He was a little late because something had gone wrong. Yan thought that if he just added a sleeping pill to the bait, everything would be fine. But it didn't work. So he had to fight the big wolf. He won, but was delayed a little because of it. Roman couldn't understand how he could have dealt with him alone, but Yang didn't plan to answer. Their time was running out, and they had already spent more than they had planned. After that, everything went according to plan. Thanks to the crack Yan made, the boys were able to escape, and finally they saw the surroundings outside the camp. The exit from the tunnel turned out to be straight through the ground, so they had to crawl through it like zombies. When almost everyone except Roman was standing on solid ground in the fresh air, Yang began to assess the situation. It seemed that they had made the right decision. There were no signs of pursuit, but the instructors had probably already found out about their escape. Roman thought they had escaped very quickly. He felt uneasy, but Jan disagreed. They wasted a lot of time. Too much time. Most likely they were already being pursued. How long had it been since any of them had felt the air outside the training ground? It seemed like the end. Now they would leave here and it would all be over. But Yang knew he couldn't relax. This was only the beginning of his journey that would bring back his past. It was starting right now under these stars, tonight, in this fresh air. The Atrian Forest is a huge forest covered with redwood trees. These trees are quite common in the mountains in the north of the Empire. Here they are everywhere. Now they were in the very center of this forest. It would take them about 2 days to get out of it. Roman thought it would be better to just hide in the trees, but Yang explained that although there were many places to hide, there were even more monsters. Despite this, the instructors were already looking for them. They would use all methods, including dogs. It was only a matter of time before they were caught. The pursuit team consists of 20 people. If they find them, it's the end for them. There is only one way to increase their chances of success. They need to split up so that the squad disperses. Each member of the team can take out 5 enemies. This means that the probability of success is higher. But in that case, Roman would still be bait. After all, they would go after the recruit with the highest rank first. The commander agreed that Roman was right. Perhaps he should have foreseen this. But everyone understood that Jan had planned it this way from the beginning. But in any case, if they all stay together, they will surely die, so the chosen tactic is necessary. Now it was time to scatter in different directions. Finally, Yang asked if anyone had any questions. Roman had one. On the game board where Jan had explained the plan, there were figures of all the people present. Each had its own number, and only Roman's figure had the word fool written instead of a number. He was curious why this was so. But Jan wasn't going to answer that, so he just ignored it. Since there were no more questions, it was time to go. But Jake stopped him at the end to thank him. If it weren't for Yan, they wouldn't have been able to get out of that hell. He promised that if he ever saw him again, he would repay him. Before their escape, Yang treated Jake like a regular recruit, but he must have had reasons to take such risks. It was a rather emotional moment, but Roman ruined it by saying that he never wanted to see them again. He immediately tried to justify himself by saying that they would have nothing to talk about if they met again, so it would be better if they just got out of there. In the end, Yang agreed that Roman was right. It would be better for them to get out of there without any problems and never see each other again. In an instant, the 4 of them were blown away like the wind. They all ran off in different directions. No one turned back to say goodbye. Everyone tried to speed up as much as they could. Yang used his methods. Divine Dragon Breath, Wings of the Windbird, a renewed skill. In a second, he shot off like an arrow, leaving only a trail of yellow light behind him like a comet's tail. He literally flew to the top of a tree to look around and see if there was a tail following. It was here that he was able to assess the properties of this body. It was a real problem. It was even difficult to breathe evenly. This body had defective blood vessels through which mana flowed. It was good that the main character was able to compensate for this with his technique. Then he remembered Roman. He smiled, remembering his sometimes funny thoughts. From time to time, it seemed that he had regressed, but he was still a child. And he himself was no better. Just as pathetic. He was the commander of the 5th group of the Special Forces. They called him the god of destruction, persecution, and espionage. Now it was time for him to test the level of the Special Forces. At that time, the administration was already on high alert. They were trying to catch the recruits as quickly as possible, until the chief instructor returned from the palace. But they clearly had problems. Unfortunately for them, the instructor had already returned and heard the entire conversation. However, he reacted a little too cheerfully. He patted him on the shoulder and said that anything could happen. There was no need to worry. While the chief instructor took the person responsible for their escape aside, 2 other subordinates of Demian surrounded the one who had conducted the roll call. The person responsible for their escape tried to assure them that the pursuit squad would soon catch the recruits who had fled. But the chief instructor was not satisfied. His previously gentle tone of voice changed completely. They couldn't do that because they had already let them escape, and he pressed down hard on the poor man's shoulder so that his legs gave way. They simply broke. But Demian was not bothered in the least. He was more interested in whether they could not even imagine that the recruits would escape. How could they not have noticed that the recruits were digging a tunnel? That they had stolen supplies for their escape? The person in charge apologized as best he could and asked for another chance. He said he would fix everything. But the instructor was cruel and unyielding. He stepped with his boot directly on the head of the man whose legs he had just broken. In his opinion, the man had already wasted all his chances, and if he trusted him again, everything would turn out the same. Demian did not take pity on him for a second. He knew that someone was behind this, and even knew who it was. After he walked away from the poor man in charge, he asked all the members of the pursuit team to come to him. From that moment on, he decided to keep an eye on everything himself. He said this mainly about the recruits. There were a few interesting ones here. He was even captivated by them. Meanwhile, in the Arterian Forest, squad number 3 was pursuing the deserters. But the captain of the detachment ordered them to stop and wait. He was puzzled by the fact that the pursuit was going so smoothly. The commander was a young man named Kelly. He asked his squad if they thought it was strange that everything was going so smoothly. His comrades, Chael and Andre, disagreed, saying that it was just number 974. But he was still concerned that some traces pointed in a different direction. His comrades assured him that the fugitive just wanted to get out of the forest as quickly as possible, and it was precisely because he treated everyone with such suspicion that he still didn't have a girlfriend. However, he couldn't shake the unpleasant feeling. He still felt that something was wrong. Fog began to rise. The squad leader understood that they had to catch the guy before he could take advantage of the opportunity and escape. Chael and Andre believed that they would quickly find room 974, but room 12 could cause a lot of trouble. Andre asked Chael which recruit he had been assigned, but before he could hear the answer, someone grabbed him from behind and dragged him to a tree. Chael didn't even have time to understand what had happened before he repeated his friend's fate. By the time Kelly returned to calm his subordinates, there was no one behind him. He stood in the middle of the forest, completely alone. His premonition had not failed him, but how could something have happened to them in such a short period of time? It was only 974, and even if it was number 12, he wouldn't have been able to defeat the instructor. Unexpectedly, he was attacked here too, but he easily dodged the blow. This trick wouldn't work a 3rd time. However, because he tried to strike back, he fell into a trap made of thin, strong threads. They dug into his throat and began to cut his skin. Kelly tried to break free, but it only got worse. At that moment, he realized that all these coincidences were not accidental. All the clues had been left behind just to lure them into a trap. He simply couldn't believe that they had lost to number 974. In his opinion, the pursuit squad was impossible to defeat, especially a recruit. But that was the case. Pursuit squad number 3 had been completely destroyed. Yang sat down on a tree to assess the battle that had just taken place. When he was running away, he knew it would be difficult, but he didn't think it would be this hard. If he had managed to master the technique, he could have fought. But in any case, he had to get out of the forest before the fog cleared. Everything here was covered in the blood of his pursuers. The hunting dogs would smell it and come here. But if he could hide his scent with something like Silimonium grass, it would be much easier to escape. Its fruits are poisonous and its leaves have an unpleasant smell, so you have to crush it and rub it on every part of your body. Even dogs hate the smell of Silamo grass. Thanks to this, they won't be able to smell it and find me. I had to hurry. It was getting harder and harder. If it got lighter, I wouldn't be able to hide anymore. But something caught his attention. Smoke. The pursuers would not have started a fire, so it was most likely Jake or Todd. How foolish. He understood that it was none of his business. They were just bait. He understood that if they attracted attention, it would only play into his hands. But he couldn't overcome his feelings. He rushed to help them. He tried to explain it to himself by saying that it was in his best interest for them to stay alive. So he had to get the guys out of there before their pursuers noticed them. But something made him stop. A chill ran through his body. It was like the feeling of destruction in countless battles. It was right behind him, and it was following him. Something enveloped his body like a snake. It was impossible to describe his state at that moment. It could even scare the commander of the special forces. And then he heard it, a familiar voice behind him. He was overjoyed that Yang had taken the bait. The voice continued to say that as soon as he saw recruit number 974, he immediately thought he was an interesting character. The flutter of a small butterfly's wings can feel like a strong typhoon. The instructor was worried that the recruit would not prove himself, but as expected, his eyes did not lie. It was Damien. It was difficult to understand what exactly brought him here and what attracted him to Yang so much. The weather was getting worse. Lightning flashed across the sky, but the heroes didn't care. The instructor was truly surprised that the 4 recruits had managed to pull this off. Yang understood how bad his situation was. This should not have happened. It was simply impossible. Damien should not have been here. Before they escaped, Yang was sure that the instructor would return later than the appointed time. Besides, in his past life, he had heard that Damien had caused a riot in the Imperial Palace and had been thrown into a dungeon for it. But if he was here now, it meant that the future had changed. It was his actions that had changed the future. But what actions could have led to this if he hadn't changed anything related to the instructor? Everything was so unclear, but he was 100% sure of one thing. His actions had caused cracks that he had not seen before, and that meant that the fateful future had been destroyed. At the very least, he would definitely not become a commander. While Yang was thinking about this, the instructor was thinking about his own thoughts. Then he asked Yang what he was going to throw away this time. A mole again, or maybe a mouse? The main character was not surprised that Damien understood everything. It was to be expected. That was what struck him about Yan. The instructor was impressed by his quick reaction. He wanted to know what had happened to make him return so quickly. After all, he thought this place was only for pathetic cockroaches. But it turned out that a funny guy had snuck in among them. Realizing where he had made a mistake, Jan regretted 1,000 times that he had let that mole go. He did not know how much the future had changed, but for now everything had turned out for the worst. However, the boy's hope did not fade. The instructor was a man who would later be called the 3 Swords of the Continent, but now nothing is known yet, so he is not going to give up. He will fight. In confirmation of his thoughts, his eyes flashed red. Seeing his mood, the instructor smiled. In his opinion, it was so exciting. And then he laughed out loud and applauded. He said it was just wonderful. He could see in Jan's eyes that he was trying to figure out how to destroy him. Damien hadn't met such a brave person in a long time. That's why it amused him so much. He thought the boy would try to run away, so this turn of events simply left him speechless. After he finished laughing, he apologized, and he made an interesting offer. He decided to give Jan a chance. If he defeated him, he would get his freedom. Jan was surprised to hear this, and his expression completely changed. This did not escape the instructor's inquisitive gaze. He was really interested in this low-level recruit who had destroyed a demonic beast, and despite this, he single-handedly sent the entire pursuit squad to the other world. His prudence, courage, endurance, and caution were not even close to the level of the trash he had escaped with. All of them had already been caught, by the way. In Damien's opinion, Young seemed to have been born for the Special Purpose Squad, and if he continued to develop, there was no telling what kind of monster he would become. But his expression changed not because of this phrase. Hearing about this chance, Young simply understood what the instructor had in mind. He realized that he couldn't win and that they just wanted to test him, so there was nothing to do. He had to show his skills. And then he just fell to his knees in tears and began to beg the instructor for mercy. Damien was completely stunned. He certainly didn't expect this. Young never ceases to amaze him. Jan turned on his acting skills. He pretended that he didn't even recognize the instructor because of his poor eyesight. He said that he had no intention of running away, but that he had been forced to do so. He made it look as if he had been abandoned in the forest, and the instructor was his savior. He began to shift all the blame onto Roman, saying that he was the one who had arranged everything. Although the instructor was dissatisfied with this turn of events, it was not so easy to fool him. The boy saw that Damien didn't really believe him and started acting like he never had before. Tears streamed down his face. Suddenly, the instructor's sword flew through the air. This was why Yang had staged this performance, to lower his guard. But Damien easily parried the attack. He was disappointed by such a cheap trick. However, it wasn't that easy. Right in front of his eyes, he saw another blade. He managed to dodge it, although the blade cut him. But that was nothing compared to what could have happened if he had noticed the attack a split second later. 2 more blades flew after it, one after the other, so that the person dodging the first one would not see the second and would be hit by it. The instructor had expected something like this. When he dodged and turned back to focus his gaze in front of him, Yan was no longer there. The instructor thought that this was his goal, to strike quietly and escape. But Yan managed to surprise him again. Damien was wrong. From the very beginning of their unpredictable encounter, Yan's goal was to destroy the instructor. With superhuman speed, the boy managed to get behind the instructor. By the time he noticed, it was too late. Because Yang had already begun to execute his 15 reflections shadow technique. If someone else had been standing in Damien's place, he would have already been dead. But it wasn't that simple with the instructor. He fought off the attack. He even managed to hurt Yan. Yang understood how he did it, but he simply couldn't believe his eyes that the chief instructor had used black mist. And then it was his turn to attack. Damien spun around as if in a storm, with black and red rays flying out in all directions. They attacked everything in their path. All the trees around them were instantly left with huge holes. And although it was difficult now with his injured leg, Yan managed to dodge, but the enemy continued to attack, simply pursuing Yan. He could not escape these rays. Then he put his palms on his dagger and ran them along it. It began to glow with a bright white light. The boy decided to use the secret technique of the 5 senses. It was called the swallow throw. With it, he was able to cut through all the rays that were trying to catch up with him. But his dagger could not withstand it. It literally crumbled in Yan's hands. Then, from inside the black and red tornado, the instructor's voice was heard. He reminded him of the words he had said at the beginning of the fight, that if Yang won, he would let him go. But now he had decided to go back on his word. He couldn't let such an interesting guy go. After all, playing with him like this from time to time would never be boring. When the instructor said all this, his expression was almost crazy. It seemed to Yan that the instructor had been bitten by a mad dog, but as soon as he thought about it, his attention was drawn to the patterns on Damien's neck. 22 hours before the escape, Yanu was informed that everything was ready. Dawnhill was a dormitory for junior recruits. At that moment, he sat there thinking only about how much he wanted to return to his family. But he knew nothing about them, and the only clue he had was that pendant. But even with all the difficulties, he wanted more than anything to find them. He wanted to live a normal life. But then, at that moment, the lid of the pendant cracked from the inside and crumbled a little. And underneath it, a pattern appeared. It must have been his family crest. If the pattern was engraved inside and under the cover, was there really a reason to hide it like that? His family had a coat of arms, which meant they did not belong to the lower classes or slaves. It was wonderful that he now had at least some information. If he could find someone who knew something about this pattern, he might be able to find his family. That's what Yang thought. But now he sees the same patterns on the instructor's body. Demian was a little surprised that Yang had stopped. He didn't want to believe that this was all he was capable of. However, Yang didn't even hear him. He was preoccupied with his own thoughts about these mysterious patterns. He had no proof. He needed to find out more. Meanwhile, the instructor continued to attack. Only when he said that he was going to destroy Yang did he snap out of his thoughts. And with a lightning-fast move, he parried the attack. He also tried to inflict damage. Although it didn't work very well, the instructor praised him. He was really curious to know where Yan had learned all this. Damian also decided to demonstrate something. A technique called Shadow Sword Black Blade. Yang understood that the instructor was just playing around. There was no other explanation for why his black blade, which was supposed to be deadly, was so weak. The boy managed to dodge the attack more or less. He had already started thinking about how to escape. But if he retreated, he would not be able to learn anything about the pattern, and he needed to find out how his parents were connected to the instructor. Very soon, mass uprisings known as the Armenian Rebellion would begin across the continent. It would lead to the collapse of 10 kingdoms and the extermination of the nobility. The uprising was so large that even the imperial family was threatened. But even such an uprising was suppressed by the imperial sword. As punishment, the emperor burned all the leaders of the uprising and their families. The fire did not go out for 20 days. This period was called the 20 Days of Decline. The leader of this uprising was the emperor's illegitimate son. Rumors of his involvement spread everywhere, but no one knew the truth. All information about him was destroyed, just like him. But there were some who knew him personally. They called him the instructor of the Continental Division of the Three Swords, or the instructor of the Special Purpose Squad. Demian's voice snapped him out of his thoughts. He said he knew what the recruit was thinking. However, he couldn't even guess. After thinking it over, Yan came to the conclusion that the uprising had to be stopped. After all, if his family was somehow connected to the instructor, then it was also connected to the Armenian uprising, and then they too could be punished. So, the plans changed. He had to get into the squad and win the instructor's trust. He would have to use him. Yang hoped only that Demian would take the bait, and then he began to praise the instructor. At first he liked it, but then the guy brought up the subject of the leader of the Special Forces unit. Damian got angry. He grabbed John by the head so quickly that he didn't even have time to react. Then he threw the recruit into a tree. He said it was just a funny joke. Jan was exhausted. The force was so great that even the tree broke into several pieces. However, the instructor had no intention of stopping. He lifted the poor boy off the ground by his clothes because his mouth was too honest. He considered it a waste of time. But Yang argued that if you listen to honest people, you can learn a lot of useful things. For example, a weakness that could be used to fight the leader of the special forces. Hearing this, the instructor froze. This was yet another time during their meeting that Jan had managed to render him speechless. After that, Damian just exploded. Such trash can't know anything. Meanwhile, the boy continued. 52nd District Simmons. This was the very weakness the instructor had been looking for so diligently. A few hours later at the Special Forces training camp, Damian was already trying on a new suit. The old one had to be thrown away. His subordinate asked about the 3 recruits he had mentioned earlier. The instructor replied that they had returned to Dawnhill. He didn't want to think about those cockroaches anymore and wanted to say something else, but he was interrupted. A shadow loomed majestically above the stairs where Demian was walking. The figure held a cane, leaning on it, but even so, it looked graceful. The shadow mockingly remarked that the instructor looked too relaxed. Demian's expression showed how angry this made him. The figure finally stepped into the light, and it was clear that Demian was being reprimanded by a gray-haired man who, judging by his clothing, was of noble birth. He said they needed to talk. The instructor tried to respond calmly. He asked his interlocutor what could have happened to make him come without warning. Of course, he recognized the man. It was Rodrigo Mayer, the head of the Special Forces. He was ranked number 1. He was the first. So they began their conversation, or rather, a veiled argument. Demian tried to assure him that everything was fine with the recruits, but Rodrigo had been told otherwise. However, the instructor pointed out that some of the recruits were much better than the current members of the squad. Rodrigo Mayer explained his presence there by saying that the level of his graduates was too low. However, Damian countered that it was all due to the incompetence of the leader in relation to the members of the squad. So it was not the fault of the graduates. During this conversation, they were so angry that their aura went beyond their bodies and thickened around them. A subordinate standing nearby could literally feel the pressure. Usually people in his place could not withstand it, and fainted. Meanwhile, the leader continued. This time he reproached Demian for not attending the Emperor's meeting. The instructor replied that he had more important things to do than this formality, but Rodrigo did not understand how anything could be more important than showing respect to the Emperor. And then he hit the most painful topic. He said that Demian was just taking advantage of the blood that flowed in his veins. The commander knew that he was absent from the meeting because of the deserters, and he aptly pointed out that the chief instructor could not even handle an ordinary recruit. But Demian reacted as calmly as possible. He said that perhaps the leader had misunderstood something because the deserters were no longer there. Rodrigo couldn't believe it because he had heard something different. However, the instructor simply said that maybe his hearing was getting worse because of his age. Instead, he made his move in this battle. He noted that there were so many worms this year. He kept crushing them, but there seemed to be no end to them. It was annoying. But now he had found the nest of these insects, so now he would be able to get rid of them completely. Rodrigo couldn't say anything in response. As they parted, Demian told him to take care of himself, but it sounded more like a threat. When they walked away from the manager, the instructor noted how confused the old man looked. After that, they returned to the topic of conversation. Was it true what his subordinate had told him earlier? The young man replied that he should not doubt it. If the instructor looked into it, he would understand everything himself. As he said this, he took off his mask. Underneath it was living proof that the deserters had not actually been killed. There was John himself, 592 Simmons County Road, an abandoned, deserted street. According to Yan, that was where he used to live. It was a place rarely visited even by those who lived nearby. A little boy was asking someone to open a window. He wanted to show them something interesting. He had caught a huge rat and wanted to show it to someone. In his opinion, it was very beautiful. This place was clearly not suitable for children to live in. Although it seemed that no one was home, the boy kept calling, and his hopes were justified. A little girl appeared at the window. In her opinion, the boy was just a fool. No one would want to look at a rat. If only he had a squirrel, she would have been interested. This girl was the daughter of the head of the special forces. And that boy turned out to be Jan. The boy was standing in front of him in the chief instructor's office, so how did he know about the commander's weakness? There weren't many children there, so everyone knew each other. But Demian somehow didn't believe the whole story. It was almost impossible for such circumstances to have coincided by chance. And in principle, it was almost impossible to believe such a blatant lie. However, he had to make the instructor believe him. The manager and the chief instructor had a very complicated relationship. Jan searched the county for the manager's weak spots, but he couldn't even find their addresses. Therefore, the instructor reacted immediately when the boy mentioned the address. He decided to take advantage of this. But Demian still found it strange. Yang said he knew where his daughter was, but how would that help him exploit the manager's weakness? Jan said he heard it himself. When they were sitting talking to the boss's daughter as children, she said she would be leaving soon. When asked why, she replied that there were bad people trying to threaten her father. That's why they were looking for her. A few days later, people in black took her away. Now he understands that they were members of the squad. Only when he got here did he realize that the girl's father was Rodrigo Mayer. Demian found the whole story amusing. What an amazing coincidence. In the past, he had been friends with the leader's daughter. He was forcibly dragged into the special forces. And then, by some mystical coincidence, he found out that the instructor had quarreled with the leader. He decided to report on his daughter while the leader was looking for Rodrigo's weak spots. Demian couldn't believe that such unlikely coincidences could happen. He, in turn, assured him that it was just the goddess of luck helping him. Although Demian was in a good mood, his patience ran out. Surely this guy didn't think that the chief instructor was just a gullible fool. So he loaded his pen with mana and threw it straight at John's head. John dodged it and it stuck into the wooden wall. Meanwhile, the instructor expressed his thoughts on the matter. Apparently, John was simply in cahoots with the manager. The main character remained as calm as possible. He wiped the blood from his cheek. The pen had still grazed him a little. After that, he began his mixture of lies and truth. He said that the instructor could think whatever he wanted. But Yang had been gathering this information and his memories all this time just to survive. He thought about what information he should connect so that it would be useful. And even if he really was the boss's accomplice, as the instructor said, he wouldn't have tried to escape and risk his life. He kept all this information only in case his escape failed, to survive. So he mixed lies with the truth, and this created expectations and disappointment. The scales in the instructor's heart will forever be tipped, not trusting him. And in order to win them over, he must show him that trust is more important. Then he will have no choice but to side with me. At that moment, Demian had doubts. He stood up and walked to the window, deep in thought. Could it be that luck is really on his side? He said aloud. Jan immediately latched onto this and picked up on it. The boy said that of course it was true because he was the instructor's lucky charm. Finally, Demian let go of John. He could return to Dawnhell for the day, but now he had to be careful what he said. Jan managed to overcome this obstacle. Although the instructor did not believe everything Jan said, it was enough for now. He had to move slowly. Before leaving, the young man wished the chief instructor a good rest, and Demian once again thought that this recruit was too loud. When the instructor was left alone, he began to think about this guy with the number 974 and the whole situation in general. He began to think that the strength testing system was broken. But then, how come the other instructors didn't notice anything? And then something in his file caught his attention. A week after this incident in the Devil's Blade Mountains, the first test for the Special Purpose Squad recruits began. Various monsters live here. The degree of danger of this place cannot even be measured. A small group of 3 people was doing well against these monsters. They had already managed to destroy a ghost goblin. Perhaps if things continued like this, they would be able to hold out until the end of the test. However, the leader of this small group understood that they couldn't relax. His companions did not listen to him very much. They were already dreaming of how easily they would defeat all the monsters. But the leader reminded them that despite the need to survive, they also had to collect magic stones. That is, if a recruit managed to survive, his future rating would depend on the number of stones he collected. In this way, it was possible to rise even higher than the 4 great families. The leader of the group only had to look away for a second, and it was the end for him, and the hopes were high. and so recruit 320 Nain was eliminated. He was killed by some kind of giant. It was the golden ogre Tezenwan, a subspecies of ogres that hide using magic and thus approach their prey. The remaining members of the group were terrified. Although they tried to do something, they too were quickly eliminated. Damien could see everything with his magic ball. That's how he kept track of the number of victims. 30 members of the group had already been killed. He ordered the bodies to be removed from the test area. Then, every 5 minutes, 50 people were sent to the gate. The main character was among the recruits waiting for their turn. In the end, he was dragged into the Mountains of Blades. Surprisingly, the instructor was in a good mood today. Most likely, he had already instructed his henchmen to survey the area. Traces would remain, but unfortunately, there was nothing of value there. To get closer to the instructor, he needed good grades. To do this, he first had to do something with this body. Because with only half of the divine breath of the dragon, he had significant limitations, so it was convenient for him that they were sent to the Blade Mountains. This is his chance. After all, there are 2 treasures there that no one knows about yet. If he gets hold of them, Yang will become stronger. But at that moment, as the boy had time to think about it, something happened. The instructor became nervous. Moreover, he seemed completely confused. Here announced the arrival of the rightful ruler of the Kabbalan Empire and the successor to His Majesty the Emperor. To say that Yang was shocked would be an understatement. As far as he could remember, 500 people had died in the first test, and nothing else serious had happened. But now the Crown Prince Leon Kavalan had arrived. Something unusual had happened. Yan had so many questions in his head. Why did the Emperor himself appear here? He couldn't forget his face. The face he saw before his destruction. The face of the man who controlled me like a puppet. His smile. And now he was standing in front of us all, introducing himself so calmly. Everyone immediately knelt on one knee and greeted His Majesty. Yang thought he had nothing left to regret. But when he saw him now, his calm expression, rage simply boiled up inside him. But then the Crown Prince spoke. He asked everyone who wanted to get out of this hellish place right now to raise their hands. He guaranteed their safety in the name of Leon. He ordered those who had been brought here by force to raise their hands. He promised freedom to everyone. At that moment, everyone froze in amazement. Yang couldn't understand what he was talking about. He couldn't believe that this was the Emperor he knew. After all, his memories still haunted him in nightmares. He remembered one incident when he was still commander of the Special Forces. At that time, the 4th group of the Special Forces had infiltrated enemy territory. Yang reported this to the Emperor at his residence. The result was successful. The mask mine was burned to the ground. But the 4th squad needed support groups stationed around them to secure their escape routes. Therefore, since only a small number of people had infiltrated, they would not be able to escape on their own. Then the Emperor said to leave everything as it was. Yang did not understand how one could abandon subjects who were willing to lay down their lives for their country. Then Leon explained that the world was like a chessboard. Slaves, subjects, warriors, and even nobles all exist for the Emperor. Hundreds of thousands of people are killed just to save the king. And in his opinion, this was the ideal picture of the world. To die for your Emperor. There could be nothing more honorable than that. All these memories haunted John. He clearly remembered his face, his bizarre smile. Meanwhile, the Crown Prince continued. Here he addressed the nobles who had come to this place only to gain power. He asked them to return home, if they did not want to deal with what would happen when he ascended the throne in the future. None of the recruits could believe that the Emperor was serious. Even Yang, who almost always understood everything and knew what to do, did not know what to think this time. He simply could not understand what had happened. Seeing that all the recruits were keeping their mouths shut, Damien tried to get out of the situation somehow. He said that the subjects were simply stunned by his sudden words. When asked why they were organizing such a project, the chief instructor replied that it was for the protection of the Empire and His Majesty. But this only angered Leon. In his opinion, the Emperor lived only for his subjects. Therefore, by driving to their deaths the people they were supposed to protect, he had no right to even wear the crown. What was the point of such a crown then? Leon Kavalan declared that he could not tolerate this. This harmful habit must be eliminated. And although the instructor tried to argue that everything was done honestly and in accordance with the law, Leon was not satisfied with such laws. What honesty could there be here? And then he asked the entire training ground if there were any who had decided to take the exam of their own free will. If there was even one, he should come forward. The recruits understood that there was no one. They all remained silent. Time passed, but no one came forward. The instructor was annoyed by this idealism. But then recruit number 974 stood up. He said he was going to leave in the middle of the day. The Emperor was surprised. He couldn't understand why a recruit with such a low rank would speak up. As far as he knew, recruits with low numbers in the northern part were treated unfairly. Yang replied that they were indeed treated unfairly. But there was one thing that was given equally to everyone. That was the willingness to fight and risk their lives to rise higher. Everyone had the right to that. He intends to participate because he has a goal he wants to achieve. The Emperor listened to the fiery speech and said to resume the exam. He renounced his words. But he will still follow the developments. The chief instructor did not object. Then the instructor addressed all the recruits. He drew their attention to the great heart of His Royal Majesty. Therefore, they must repay his mercy with their lives. The instructors and administration began to tell the recruits how the departure would take place. When they entered the gate, they would all be assigned to their respective positions. It is true that sometimes people get separated during the move, but there is no need to worry. Number 974 was called first. After all, he was the only one who had expressed a desire to take the exam. He wasn't worried about the exam at all. He was worried about why Leon Kavalan was there. He had never attended a meeting in his past life. This reality was fundamentally different from his old one. Something had happened to the Emperor. He couldn't believe that it could be his influence. But if not, then what else could be the problem? When the transfer ended, his arms and legs were still in place. And for that, he was grateful. But he landed in the wilderness. That could be a problem. First, he had to find a weapon. The smell was sulfur mixed with demonic energy. Such a smell is characteristic only of the Valley of Winds. Then, behind him, he heard a strange sound, like a scream or a squeak. At that time, the other recruits were in no better shape. They huddled together in groups to survive. It was one of these groups that was attacked by a Kakadu griffin. Even large groups had to flee for their lives, but just as they were about to be caught, a girl came to their rescue. She used the Dark Soul technique of the 15th type, Vision Dust. It turned out to be Lorena Beowulf, recruit number 1, the best in training, the best in battle. When the battle was over, the small group could not stop thanking Lorena. If it weren't for her, they would no longer be alive. They said that most of them were members of the 700th Squad. They had so many wounded that they were no longer trying to get out of the valley. The detachment asked Lorena if they could join them. She replied that it made no difference to her. At that moment, she was thinking about something else. Because she still hadn't seen Jian, she began to think that he might already be dead. Why had he gone so far? And why was he so confident, even in front of the Emperor? But her thoughts were interrupted by an annoying, pompous voice. It was recruit number 2, Cruel Dwight. He believed that it would be better to simply tear off their limbs than to take them with them. In his opinion, the 700th Squad was useless trash. They wouldn't even be good bait. Cruel thought that Lorena had simply decided to play nanny, to which the heroine replied that you can't know everything about a person just by looking at their number. The guy added that most likely after this exam, the first place would change, but the girl replied that if he continued to focus so much on numbers, he might miss something more important. At this point, recruit number 3, Kasa Ifrane, intervened in their argument. He decided that if they had free time, he could complain a little too. He reproached Cruel for his short-sightedness. This exam is an individual competition, but it is not necessary to compete here. Already angry, the young man did not want to believe that Kasa was also on the side of this trash. But recruit number 3 replied that the larger the group, the better it responds to crises. Besides, he had already promised them that they would all pass. As a nobleman, he had to lead the common people. His interlocutor only smiled at this. He said that the family of a traitor could not be considered noble. These words struck a nerve, and Cruel just kept pressing on the sore spot. The Ifrin family had done such things to the common people that he simply could not lead them after that. Then the direct threats began. He said to be careful because someone might prefer to simply cut off the last remaining head of the Ifrin family. The look on Kasa's face showed how much those words hurt him, but he reacted as calmly as possible. He thanked the annoying boy for his concern. After all, he had probably put a lot of effort into thinking about his family. At moments like this, Ifrane even envied Cruel. In the Duait family, the clan was represented by 2 older brothers, and even if Cruel lived without a care in the world, he didn't have time to finish his sentence before the enraged boy's fist flew toward Cass's face. But Lorena managed to catch it. She ordered him to calm down, and despite the fact that he was furious, he obeyed her. After that, the defeated boy turned around and left. He still thought they were all stupid, and he was the only one who was right. He didn't need such idiots around him, otherwise he would lose. As he walked away, he was caught up in a whirlwind of memories. He remembered how he was told that he had no right to want anything. He must not think about it. He must live as if he were already dead. But then he was abruptly torn from his memories by the bloodstains he saw right under his feet on the ground. The bloody traces led to a rather dark place in the shadows. Most likely someone had been injured here recently. Maybe it was a rare monster, or maybe there were many of them. So Cruel decided to hide and investigate the situation. Behind a large boulder, he saw a person surrounded by a large number of lifeless goblin bodies. At first, Dwight didn't understand what the man was doing, but then he could see. The guy was eating a red goblin. There were 2 things he needed to find in the Blade Mountains. They were necessary to achieve Jean's goals. First, he needed to get some meat, so this red goblin came in very handy. On his first enemy, he used the Dark Spirit's 21st technique, the Burning Dragon Flame. It was his desire to burn everything. He ripped out the goblin's heart and turned its body to ash, but when he looked up, he saw dozens of goblins staring right at him. Today, as always, luck was clearly on his side. Yang knew his strength would be enough to deal with all of them, so he was not worried, but rather happy. The magic stones, which were considered a byproduct of the monster's existence, were used as accessories for ordinary magical items. That was until Professor Isaac presented a report at the Academy on the true value of these stones. They could be used to absorb the characteristics of monsters and mana, the endurance of orcs, the regeneration of trolls, the strength of ogres. All of this could be combined in one person. But of course, the academic community was against it. They considered it impossible. After all, humans and monsters use mana quite differently. Rector Nairon asked Professor Isaac if he could prove it, and the professor did. When it became clear that the article had been proven, the information quickly spread across the continent. Thus, monsters became easier to see in pharmacies than in dungeons. The professor said that the method of removing the toxicity from magic stones so that they could be absorbed was quite complicated. It required moongrass and lava stones, but there is an easier way to absorb them. You can eat them. Yang couldn't imagine doing that again. They tasted disgusting. To combine the magical power of the stone with the poison from the monster's heart, you have to eat them together in a ratio of 2 to 1. One must be prepared to die. After all, the poison of the magic stone eats away from the inside. It must be slowly removed with the breath of the divine dragon. It took longer than he had planned. He must be more careful. At that moment, he was attacked. It was Cruel. He tried to trample Jan into the ground at full speed. Cruel was shocked when he saw a recruit from the 900th Squad here. He decided to take the magic stone, but when the dust settled, he saw that he was standing on the ground. Jan was not under his feet, but as soon as he raised his head, he saw his enemy. He was leaning against a boulder and complaining that in the Blade Mountains, such scoundrels were more dangerous than monsters. Cruel had already heard that there were types of barbarians who ate monsters, but this was even more disgusting than he had imagined. He wanted to destroy such a barbarian, but he offered to spare his life in exchange for all the stones that Jan had collected. After all, he was a true nobleman and had to show mercy. Yang was a little confused by these words because he didn't have any magic stones. Cruel, of course, did not believe him. He thought that Yang was so stupid that he did not understand the danger. There was no one else around. Therefore, getting rid of such trash would be a matter of seconds. So if he wanted to live, he had to give up the stones. But at that moment, recruit number 2 did not take into account that the number does not always reflect the exact strength of a recruit. and the fact that there was no one else here did not work in his favor. In any case, he didn't have time to come to his senses. Jan literally jumped at Cruel with superhuman speed and punched him right in the stomach. At that moment, some memories and thoughts that had already been lived flashed before Cruel's eyes. Thoughts that he was supposed to become the owner of the Dwight mansion. Memories of when, at the age of 12, he realized that most of his life was just rubbish. He thought it was natural for him to be the successor to the family. Unfortunately, however, he had 2 older brothers. They were so afraid that the younger one would try to become the head of the family. They sent him to the special forces, supposedly for a better education, but in reality, they just threw him out, and he will never forgive them for that. Cruel Dwight is the one who should really be the successor to the Dwight family. They are a cut above all this trash, and as soon as he gets out of here, he will destroy all of them. But then he came back to reality, and the face of recruit number 974 flashed before his eyes, and then there was intense pain. The only route to the foot of the cliff runs through Snake Canyon. It was named so because its shape resembles a snake slithering along. No one knows where the canyon ends because no one has ever reached the end. But one lucky commoner and one not-so-lucky nobleman were now walking straight through it. The nobleman kept saying that the commoner had no right to be there, that this was the body of the true heir to the Duane family, and the commoner walked along, sometimes urging him on and holding him back by the leash so he wouldn't run away. This commoner was Jan. To tell the truth, he was tired of listening to all the whining. The nobleman was cruel and he was tired of carrying the huge sack by himself, but he was to blame. He shouldn't have threatened to kill Jan. Only one question bothered Kryl. Why did Jan need so many goblin bodies? However, Jan had no intention of answering him. Then Dwight remembered that according to the law, anyone who forced a nobleman to work would be punished. Then Jan threw a stone at him. He asked if he would be punished if a nobleman was merely injured. Tears were already welling up in Cruel's eyes. He couldn't understand what kind of guy this was. He thought that this boy would lose his vigilance due to the unexpected attack, but things turned out a little differently than he expected. After Young's first blow, he became indignant. Jan simply slapped him. Of course, it didn't end there. Dwight started yelling again, asking how he dared to hit him. Then he got 4 more slaps. Only then did he calm down. Cruel couldn't even imagine that he would ever be so humiliated. While the boy was thinking about all this, Young tried to explain to him that if he just apologized, maybe he wouldn't get hit. But he didn't listen to him at all. At that moment, Dwight thought that it wasn't his fault. He lost only because his mana was scattered during the unexpected attack. As soon as he regained his mana, he would destroy this recruit with his own hands. But then Young noticed that no one was listening to him. This made him a little angry. Cruel immediately pretended that he had no ulterior motive, but Young said he knew what he was thinking. So if he didn't want to crawl on all fours, he'd better just keep quiet. In Yan's opinion, Cruel was a rather strange guy. Although there was life in him, it seemed to be moving in a different direction. He couldn't confuse this feeling with anything else. Magoon, demonic weapons, or weapons of darkness. One type of magic is dark magic. It uses the power of darkness. Some magicians use the power of darkness in combination with cold weapons. With such power, results can be achieved much faster than with weapons alone. But when a person uses this magic, their mind and body are gradually destroyed. This technique ultimately causes a person to be consumed by darkness and lose their sanity. In his past life, Cruel was called Bloodson. He became famous for the evil deeds he committed in an attempt to lead his clan. Perhaps it was all because of magic. It is unlikely that he has mastered it now. Dwight asked them to at least loosen the leash. After all, he couldn't escape. There was only one road here. He wasn't an animal, and it looked strange. Yana was tired of his constant complaints during the entire journey. But he let him go anyway. However, it was probably only because his task was complete. They had finally arrived. Where they had arrived, there was a real treasure. Cruel couldn't understand anything. They were standing in front of a huge hole in the ground. Then Jan ordered all the goblins that Dwight had dragged all the way there to be thrown into the hole. To Cruel, it seemed like pure cruelty. Jan had forced him to drag them all the way here just to throw them away. But he obeyed the order anyway. He was only concerned about whether he could leave now. Yang replied that he had done a good job, so he would give him one piece of advice. He shouldn't just leave, he should run away without looking back, right now. At that moment, 2 red eyes appeared from the darkness in the hole in the ground. The goblins who had been thrown into this hole turned out to be bait for a slightly larger monster. With the help of these bodies, the seal that had kept this creature asleep was activated, and he woke up. At that moment, he was only concerned with who had awakened him. Seeing this, Cruel realized what a huge mistake he had made. He immediately started yelling at Jan for what he had done. But the monster corrected Dwight. It was he who did it. No one else. After all, he had thrown off those goblins. Then the monster rose and with a wild roar ordered that the souls of the people be brought to him. At that moment, when the monster broke free, Casa, who was standing who knows where, felt something. He asked Lorena if she had felt anything, and she confirmed it too. Dark magic of immeasurable power is spreading, and its source is in the Serpent Canyon. What could have happened there? But there was no answer to that question. After all, no one here had ever encountered anything more powerful than this source. How powerful was that monster if it had such mana? Lorena suggested that Cassie change the plan. They needed to go to the gates right now. Casa couldn't understand why she was in such a hurry, but the girl had already gone to order everyone to return, without even looking at the exam. When Casa finally managed to catch up with her and ask her where they were rushing to and why, he received a very picturesque answer. Lorena said that the monster's power was on par with that of the head. It seemed impossible. After all, the head had long been among the 5 fingers of the Empire for his pure strength. He is the guardian god of the North. So it was almost impossible to believe that this monster was as strong as the head of the Beowulf family. If that was the case, even the instructors wouldn't be able to stop it. They were all in big trouble. At that time, everyone at the instructor station was working away, unaware of what was happening, when suddenly they were all destroyed. It took only a second, and they just started to evaporate before their eyes. At that time, Roman was obtaining magical stones with another recruit, but it didn't last long. In just a moment, they were gone, and a fire was burning in their place. However, even this did not stop the monster. It was not enough for him. He was looking for more souls. Everyone rushed toward the gates. Some fell and died while running, but then one of the recruits blocked their way. He ordered them to stop. This recruit heard a voice in his head repeating that there were not enough souls. He wanted to say something else, something like, bring him more souls. But before he could say it, he began to bend in different directions. It was as if layers were inflating inside him. He couldn't hold on for long, and eventually he was simply torn apart, and his blood began to form a pattern, a magic circle. Somewhere right inside their heads, everyone suddenly heard a voice. It said that it had found something. The weaker recruits' heads began to ache so badly that they simply fell down. At that moment, the monster emerged from the magic circle. He said that they had awakened him. And since that was the case, he wanted to thank them by destroying all these people. This monster was called the Ancient Rich Man. He was a lich, but not an ordinary one. The sorcerers were upset that magic had no limits, but human life did. So very greedy sorcerers always sought ways to master magic completely. In the end, they sacrificed their souls to darkness and gained eternal life. But at that moment, they turned into monsters that hated all living things. Thus, they became lichs, people who chose to become undead instead of dying. When Lorena saw him, she realized that this was no ordinary lich. He was like eternity itself, a monster that had devoured countless lives. Lorena's head was filled with questions about why such a monster was here now. She couldn't understand where he had come from. The recruits who were dealing with Roman were Todd and Jake, the same ones who had also tried to escape. Now they were running for their lives after the leader of their small group. As the strongest recruit, Roman immediately sensed something unnatural, and so he managed to get his team away before they were overtaken by death. All the instructors they had seen while running were already dead. Seeing all this, Roman realized who was to blame for what had happened. It was Yan. Shortly before they were transferred to the Knife Mountains, Roman approached Yan. He was surprised that although he had also escaped, he looked fine. He talked to him about it, but too loudly for such a topic. The boy suggested that he go with him to the mountains, but John refused. Instead, he gave Roman one piece of advice, since he had helped him escape. He said that if something serious happened, he should immediately run to the gates and forget about the exam. At that moment, the recruit didn't think much of it, but now he understood that all these mass killings were Yan's doing. At that moment, Lorena was standing in front of one of the most powerful creatures she had ever encountered. She gave the order to run to the other third gates. The path to them was blocked by this monster. She herself was going to stay there. Casa tried to dissuade her from this plan, but he was unsuccessful. Lorena said she would stay and stall for time. Casa had to evacuate the other recruits. Casa understood that she couldn't do it alone. He wanted to stay with her. But she reminded him that he had to survive for the sake of his family. The boy immediately reneged on his words. He himself understood that he couldn't die here and now. Lorena was left alone against him. This only made Lika laugh. Could this ordinary little person really want to go against him alone? But the girl did not panic or lose heart. In her opinion, the battle was not yet lost. She had two advantages. First, she had a consecrated Mephril sword. It was perfect for fighting the undead. That's how she reassured herself. But then the creature began to recite some kind of spell in a language she didn't know. It wanted to destroy her and had chosen a spell specifically for that purpose. A magical volley of skulls. Dozens of black skulls suddenly rushed straight at Lorena. She responded with an equally weak technique called the Dark Marriage Ceremony of the Windbird's Wing. She successfully dodged most of the skeletons. And for the rest, she simply threw her sword. And while the Lich was watching all this, she came up behind him and attacked him from there. The monster was shocked because he knew that a wizard who used magic for both attack and defense could not do both at the same time. Lorena hoped that if she used this, she would win the battle. But then the monster began to chant a spell in an unknown language again. This frightened her a little. She didn't know what to expect this time. But what the spell turned out to be impressed her even more. It was a protective magic circle. If this was skeleton magic, then the number of skeletons needed to attack and defend at the same time must be incredible. While she was wondering about this, one skeleton came up behind her. She didn't even see it. The girl did not have time to react, and the skull struck her hard in the back. Her sword flew away, and she found herself trapped by the skeleton. He tied her up with his long tail. She asked if he was going to let her go, to which the Moon Rich Man replied that he wanted her. This nobility that stands against him alone, he wants to break her. He wants to break this nobility. He wants to turn her into a dead person who will serve only him. At that moment, in the lair of the ancient leech, a creature approached the great gates. It knew that the Moon Rich Man was now defenseless, so it chose this very moment. But as soon as this creature approached the stairs, a trap was triggered. It was a high-level spell of flame called Stormflash. The fire simply struck her. The creature was a little surprised as it thought it would be easy to lure this brute out of an empty house. But he showed himself in all his glory from the very beginning. This creature turned out to be Yang. He deliberately wore the skin of a volcanic armadillo. After all, it has the strength to withstand heat magic. As Yang walked down the endless stairs, he discovered 492 magical traps, but only 36 of them were working. From the very beginning, he had a plan to use the goblins to lure out the Lich, and then take the treasures for himself, although it would not be as easy as he thought. Of course, this was only possible if he had complete knowledge of the lair. Yang learned about the Lich when he was the commander of the squad. Upon returning from his mission, he received a report stating that 900 people had been killed. Only 100 remained alive. It was a colossal loss. The existence of the training center was threatened. It was also reported that the Lich had awakened because of the blood of a recruit who had fallen into the lair. After an investigation, his lair was found. It had most likely been built in ancient times and filled with mysterious treasures. A magical book that gave whoever read it the right to call themselves a sage. Treasures that could provide a comfortable life. But the most important thing was missing. The life container. It was a magical egg that contained the life force and mana of the Lich. And although in a previous life the report said that someone damaged the vessel during a fight with the Lich and took it, in this life it still exists. There is a restriction in the secret book given by the Emperor. It can only collect mana but not return it. But if you possess the life container, which is crystallized mana, then you will not need the book. It will become possible, the breath of the divine dragon. Yang believes that if he manages to take advantage of all these opportunities, he will most likely surpass even his past life. Finally, he arrived. The lair was located on the lowest floor. It was called the Altar of the Ancient Lich. In front of him was a huge door. He didn't know how to open it, so he decided to experiment. But his first attack triggered a trap. The face of some creature flew out of the door and tried to catch Yan. The report said there was a guard here. Most likely this was him. Yan had not yet reached the door when it sprang into action. It was a ghost without substance, a magical seal blocking his face. The guard said he couldn't recognize the face and vanished into thin air. That wasn't very good, but it wasn't a big deal. There was another way to get in. The report also described the location of a secret passage. On the wall to the side of the door, he could feel a slightly protruding platform. Pressing it opened another passage. It was created for slaves. Most likely, there used to be a large number of slaves in the lair, so there is a separate entrance for them. This passage is a maze with many traps, so the way through may take some time. But there was nothing that Commander Yang of the squad couldn't overcome. Besides, he had plenty of time. After all, another recruit is holding up the old skeleton for now, so there's no need to worry. Beowulf, even bound before the monster, did not lose her dignity. She continued to mock him. Leech paid no attention to this. He fantasized about what he would do when he took her soul. Maybe he would make her his pet. Or maybe he would transplant some of her body parts onto an orc. Or maybe he would turn her into a zombie and force her to eat people. He wanted to know if she would remain as noble as she was now. Well, enough small talk. This is the end. With these words, he directed his tentacles toward her. However, Lorena did not understand at all why the moon-rich man thought this was such a big deal. She was only able to grab them with her teeth and bite them off. In her opinion, they were completely useless and served no purpose. This made Lich very angry, and he began to gather his power into a small ball. He was going to turn her into dust. This technique is called Dark Destruction Magic, Dark Breakthrough. But just as he was about to deliver the fatal blow, something distracted him. He sensed that something incredible had happened. Listening to his senses, he realized that the barrier around the altar had been destroyed. The realization came to him instantly. The girl was just bait. It was a plan to lure the rat into the lair while he was distracted. But Beowulf had no idea what was going on. The monster thought she was pretending and, in his anger, threw her to the ground with all his might, using the gravity wave. After that, she immediately lost his interest. He decided to return to his lair. Using magic, the Lich opened the gate using special coordinates. Lorena was left alone with mixed feelings. She did not understand why he had left so suddenly or where he had gone. At that time, the moon-rich man had already moved to the entire altar. At that moment, he was concerned about who had managed to get to his altar. After all, to get here, one had to bypass the defenses and traps. He had been making them for 1,000 years, therefore no one could get here. So this person was either from the Sorcerer's Guild or the Imperial Army. Here he saw empty glasses from his elixir on the floor. Someone had dared to drink it all. He had prepared most of them himself over thousands of years. The best elixir that restored magical power in the body. Extra elixir. He had prepared them for so long in order to be resurrected in human form. But now all his efforts had come to nothing. Someone in the corner spoke up. In his opinion, extra elixir was too pretentious a word. The monster immediately realized that it was this person who had broken through the barrier and entered his altar. It was Yang, but instead of showing aggression, he suggested that the monster calm down and catch his breath. The young man suggested that he drink a glass with him. Excessive consumption of magical energy causes a person to become intoxicated. Meanwhile, Yang continued to talk about how saving money was a sin, so it was necessary to drink everything. At this point, it began to dawn on the monster that this was clearly not a guild or an army. It was just a drunk kid. At that moment, Yang wondered why Lich had returned so quickly. Could Yang have torn him away while he was having fun? But the monster was not in the mood for conversation. He ordered the boy to shut up. First, he would destroy him, and then everything alive outside. Yang paid no attention to his words. He said that a rare item had been stolen. He also noted that he could have used the secret passage but did not. The monster asked why he had destroyed the barrier then. Yang replied that he had suddenly had an epiphany. After all, there were not only elixirs here, but also ancient documents. For example, books about the hearts of mana and dungeons. The monster had been collecting them like a madman, sitting in his lair for 1,000 years. This made him even angrier. After all, it had been incredibly difficult for him. His name was Momon. He was a man who had decided to become undead for 1,000 years, just for revenge, and this rat dared to ruin all his plans. When he said this, his eyes were burning. To get back at the guy who betrayed him and took everything from him, he humiliated himself and became a zombie. However, Yana didn't care whose plans he had ruined. He understood that he was already drunk and didn't care at all. On the contrary, he liked it. That was the last straw. In Momon's opinion, Yana's arrogance was beyond the pale. So he decided to burn all his arrogant blood with the great magic of the Raven's breath. And when the blow seemed inevitable, Yan simply said to stop. And that was enough. The hand with the focused fire stopped right in front of his face. This happened because the Lich sensed the energy of mana. Yan showed him that he had already absorbed the monster's life force. Moreover, he had also formed the heart of mana from this reservoir. Momon couldn't understand how such a young man knew how to use the heart of mana. The main character was now running across the long bridge located in the altar. In the place where he had been just a second ago, only holes remained from the attacks of the wide radius fire magic technique. Not far from him, the ancient Lich was chasing after him. He was amazed at how a worthless boy with no skills was dealing with the traps. To which Yang replied that anything was better than standing still in such a situation. Incidentally, the monster's life force was inside him, so if he destroyed the boy, he would die too. But Momon replied that he would not destroy him. He would simply move into his body. After all, he had been preparing for 1,000 years, and the boy had simply taken everything and destroyed it. So it would be fairer if he took this body that had absorbed his life force and elixirs and used it. Yang was so shocked that he almost stopped. He could not have expected that someone would want to use his body. After thinking about it for a few seconds, he refused but apologized. He explained that he was not that kind of person. These jokes angered Momon even more, and he suggested that Yang surrender. He promised that he would treat his body with care. Realizing that Yan would not give up, he used the parallel calculation magic hexagonal storm. Seeing such a large number of magic circles, he realized that he had no choice. He would have to use the divine breath of the dragon. And at that moment, as he activated his spell, Yang activated the Mana Heart operation. All this was only for this, to become stronger. The Lich's spell simply destroyed the entire city, so he had to stop. There was nowhere else to run. A lot of time had passed since he last used his power. Lich was already afraid that Yang had died. But then he heard a boy's voice behind him. He advised him to worry about himself instead. Momon realized that he would not be destroyed so easily, and he was about to attack again. Just then, Yang sprang into action. Using the Dark Dragon Shinrian technique, his speed increased several dozen times. With such speed, he flew through the main gate like a bullet. Lich stood there, unable to understand how such trash could develop such speed. Meanwhile, Yang didn't know what to do. He didn't think things would turn out like this. Mana constantly circulates in the heart of Mana. It is similar to the breath of a dragon. This is the true power of the breath of the divine dragon. Yang absorbed everything he could to become stronger. The monster's magic stone, heart, and elixir, even its life container. If this continued, he would soon be able to regain the power he had in his past life. He might even become stronger. But the boy's thoughts were interrupted. He stopped abruptly. There was a wall in front of him, but he clearly remembered that there was a passage here. Leech was already catching up with him. He was flying and simultaneously calling Yan a rat. He also explained that he had blocked all the doors. There was nowhere to run, so now he had no choice but to destroy the monster. But he had already used all the weapons he had. He now had no way to fight him. Meanwhile, Momon had already begun to activate a spell to cut off the boy's limbs. He used the Dragon Skull Undead Summoning technique, hoping that Yang would simply give up his body. The boy knew he couldn't defeat the ancient Lich. However, he didn't have to. The wall behind him collapsed, and from there emerged his savior. The Emperor appeared. He said that the recruit had done well. Now he could leave this monster to him. The Emperor heard that an accident had occurred during training, so he rushed over immediately. The number of recruits who died or went missing because of this monster's fault is over 100. They were all his subjects whom he valued. Therefore, he would never forgive him. After that, he turned his attention to the young man. It was the same recruit who had volunteered to go to the Mountain of Blades. The Emperor asked him what he was doing there. Yang replied that he was pursuing a leech and had lost his way. Then Leon praised him. After all, he had tracked down such a terrible threat all by himself. The main character silently thanked Roman. He had done a good job. Before the exam began, he told Roman to go to the chief instructor and give him special coordinates so that the Crown Prince could also hear them. Momon recognized the Emperor's body and energy. He asked how he was related to Bahamut. The Emperor was a little surprised why the Lich mentioned the name of the founder of their state. These words shocked the ancient Lich. It seemed absurd to him. But one thing he knew for sure. The blood of Bahamut flowed in this man. It was all really strange. He remembered the day when he finally created the dragon's breath. On that day, he spoke with his arch-enemy. At that time, that enemy was still his friend. He praised him for finally fulfilling his part of the bargain. But now it was time for him to pass on to the next world. After all, the dragon's breath belonged only to him, only to Bahamut. Today was such a wonderful day because he was finally close to the blood of his enemy, the one who had once stolen his technique. From the very beginning, an idea had formed in Momon's mind. He had thought about it for a long time. He has a steady flow of mana and the restraining power of the dungeon. He also has the explosive power and absorption capacity of the magic circle. If they merged and become one, a power of immense strength could be born. To satisfy his curiosity, he began experiments on the body of his close friend, Bahamut. The experiment was successful. Bahamut's body was transferred to a new mana connection. That was when the heart of mana was born. The changes were quite significant, and Bahamut felt them very well. Perhaps if he used this, he could create a new fighting technique. They created a martial art that used the heart of mana and named it, according to Bahamut's wishes, Breath of the Divine Dragon. But the possibilities of the heart of mana are not limited to this. The more Momon explores, the more he discovers. The moment he turned his back on his friend, the latter apologized. Momon did not have time to understand what Bahamut was talking about when his stomach was pierced by the hand of his best friend. Bahamut said that he had done a good job. The heart of mana, the breath of the dragon, would not exist without him. Therefore, he simply had to pass on to the next world. He already knew too much. In Bahamut's opinion, all of this should belong only to him. Such is the story of the ancient Lich's betrayal. So much time has passed. He barely managed to keep his soul alive with the magic power he had left, and every time he breathed life into his almost decayed body, he repeated only one thing. He reminded himself how much he craved revenge. A just punishment for the man who took everything from me, a severe punishment for the one who betrayed my trust. And then the battle began. A battle that some had been preparing for 1,000 years, and some did not expect such a turn of events at all. The Crown Prince radiated confidence. In the monster's opinion, this guy was too arrogant. Momon used the parallel calculation magic hexagonal storm. In response, the Emperor used the divine dragon's breath. In an instant, all of the monster's spells were reduced to dust. Next, he used the yellow dragon summoning technique. Even after his death, Bahamut continues to cause problems for Momon. The Crown Prince was angry that some leech was pronouncing the founder's name so carelessly. In their fierce battle, the Emperor had the upper hand. He didn't even let the magic circles activate. Then Momon ordered his slaves to tie the boy's legs, but Leon just continued to mock him. In Leon's opinion, this was even beneficial. After all, everyone was gathered in one place. Then he thrust his sword into the floor, and he used the third type of yellow dragon summoning technique, the Phantom Dragon, and all the magic circles simply scattered in the air. Momon was angrier than ever. He used a 4th level dark magic attribute that enhanced magic. Then he used the 5th type extreme destruction magic. In response, the Emperor used the 7th type yellow dragon summoning, the 3rd type dragon sword, the 5 senses of the royal sword technique. So they finally clashed face to face, and the world of their mana, like forces of light and darkness, spread throughout the hall. When you look at it from the side, it's really impressive. It was just incredibly beautiful. Yana was impressed that the Crown Prince was fighting this ancient lich on equal terms. The materialized sword really resembled a dragon. It was hard to believe that it was because of the breath of the divine dragon. Now was a great opportunity to analyze the prince's military power. After all, he might have to fight him in the future. But that was not now. First, he wanted to find his family. Here he saw a crack in the floor and was about to run away, but someone stopped him by putting a hand on his shoulder. From the voice, it was clear that this was the leader of the special forces, Rodrigo Mayer. He said that now the most interesting part was about to begin. He also said that recruit number 974 was strange. From the escape of the recruits to the appearance of the healer, he was always at the center of events. Only Yan wanted to address him. The man immediately interrupted him, saying that he should be addressed as the head of the special forces unit. And he immediately began to grumble that young people had no manners or respect. In Yang's opinion, he behaved just like an old grandfather. The chief instructor concealed what was happening, but the incident had already been reported. He was given the report. Only 4 recruits ranked from 10th to 900th managed to escape. 3 of them were caught in a nearby forest. The last one was being searched for by 3 pursuit groups. All were found dead. The whereabouts of recruit number 974 could not be determined. But now the head of the special purpose unit sees him with his own eyes. He heard that even the chief instructor had gone in search of him. Only the lowest ranking members of his team survived. And now he has even managed to escape from the ancient leech. According to Rodrigo Mayer, this is all too strange. This cannot be called mere luck. Jan agreed. It really wasn't luck. It was super luck. Maybe he saved the planet in a past life. He said it like a naive child. In the man's opinion, this guy was joking like an old man. He couldn't expect his boss to believe such nonsense. However, Yang continued to stand his ground. He really did have amazing luck. Then Yang asked if they wanted to punish him for his luck. The boss was shocked by his audacity. He wondered where a guy ranked 974th could find such courage. Maybe he was the illegitimate son of some noble family. Yang asked if he thought the crown prince needed help. However, Rodrigo said that was complete nonsense. Even if he joined the battle, he would only be a hindrance to the emperor. This lich did not die even after his life force disappeared, but he completely absorbed it. But perhaps if he activated the Heart of Mana and used all of his life force. At that moment, Momon was already in a difficult situation. The Emperor attacked relentlessly. He had to dodge and run away more, then he felt something. His mana was decreasing. It felt as if someone was absorbing his magical power. Then he began to realize what the problem was. He guessed that the boy was doing something. He was probably using his life force. In the healer's opinion, it was contempt. He decided not to show weakness anymore. Then he began to literally tear his stomach with his fingers. And he said that even though he wanted to steal this body, he no longer needed it. A large red eye appeared on his stomach. Momon decided to destroy everything. It was the territory expansion technique. It was a state in which a secret desire was brought to life. Only the 4 heads of the family, with the exception of the emperor, can use this technique. The secret desire of the Leica was for this descendant of Bahamut to die. But this arrangement did not suit Yan, so he completely used up the heart of the many, trying to release all the magic of his life container. At that moment, Momon felt that he would not be able to complete the technique. His strength was leaving him. Then the Crown Prince finally realized that it was time to end it all. He summoned the yellow dragon, but just as he struck, his sword broke. The monster no longer cared about expanding his territory, but such an attack could not penetrate him. But just as he was about to rejoice at the sight of his broken sword, a new yellow sword began to appear. It was the dragon sword. He used the yellow dragon summoning technique. With his next attack, he completely destroyed the ancient lich. Momon believed that they were not finished yet. He could not believe that it was over so easily. Everything had been destroyed before his very eyes. It was the end. The plan that had been secretly prepared and the resentment that had been building up for 1,000 years, everything was destroyed because of one person. He tried to say something else, something about Bahamut, something about how his life had not been wasted. And he wanted to ask something, but he didn't have time and simply turned to ash. Finally, this terrifying boy was finished. For the Emperor, it was a huge weight off his shoulders. However, after the battle, he was able to draw some conclusions for himself. He was still quite weak. If the territory expansion had worked, he might not have won. After the battle, when the old man approached the Crown Prince, he began to grumble at him. In his opinion, he should not have fought the Lich himself. However, Leon asked the leader to stop grumbling. He asked if the recruit was injured. The latter replied that thanks to the Emperor, everything was fine. Then the Crown Prince ordered Rodrigo to escort the recruit back to his duties. After all this, Jan's plan in the Blade Mountains was complete. The results exceeded all expectations. Thanks to Momon, he created the Heart of Mana and saw the true power of the prince. But a tiny piece of clothing with remnants of an ancient leech had not been destroyed. And when everyone had left, a strange world appeared from under it. Yan was relaxing with a nice drink. He couldn't even remember the last time he had been able to relax like this. It seemed that so much time had passed since the events in the Mountains of Blades. This dormitory for recruits resembled a mansion. Yan wondered if all nobles lived in such places. It was so different from the room he had lived in before. In the eastern part, there was a room measuring 5 square meters. In contrast, this mansion-style room was 28 square meters. But in any case, he had to do well on the test. The exam results had been announced some time before. Despite the fact that the first exam was slightly delayed due to certain circumstances, all the recruits worked very well. Thanks to the Crown Prince, everything was resolved quite quickly. All of them were able to pass the exam without incident. Those who survived can now be proud of themselves, but there are some who have distinguished themselves from the rest. We will now announce the results. 1st through 10th place are the highest ranks, 11th through 100th are the middle ranks. The rest are the lower ranks. Some recruits watched everything from above on the balconies. They noticed that the chief instructor had not arrived. The quality of living will depend on the results. Also, recruits with high scores will be able to visit the Imperial Archives. The Imperial Archives are a treasure trove of all kinds of precious weapons and secret books from the time of the founding of the Imperial Palace. It is said that there are hundreds of new swords there, and the bookshelf is the size of a fortress. Recruits ranked 1st to 10th will have access to 3 floors. Those ranked 10th to 100th will have access to 2 floors. And after the 100th, only 1 floor. And now for the announcement of the places. 5th place went to Roman. He defeated most of the goblins in the Blade Mountains. 4th place goes to Cruel Dwight, who single-handedly cleared out the troll's lair. But that wasn't enough for him. He complained that only 3 floors of the archive had been opened. 3rd place went to Casa Ifrain, who conquered the orc village without suffering any damage. 2nd place went to Larina Beowulf. She defeated the Golden Ogre alone. And then everyone had questions. After all, no one could imagine anyone more outstanding than Larina. In the girl's opinion, the place meant nothing. Number 1 was just a facade. She remembered the monster she couldn't defeat. She understood how helpless she was in the face of true evil. So she had to become stronger. But her thoughts were interrupted by Cruel, who decided to come over at that very moment to gloat. He pointed out how haughty she had been during the exam, as if she were capable of protecting everything herself. But in reality, she couldn't even keep her place. He even managed to make her decision to stand up to the Lich look bad. Casa aptly warned Larina that Cruel's position had worsened after her return from the Mountains of Blades. However, Dwight did not stop there. He pointed out how weak she was in battle against the dead, and that she barely survived only because she begged the monster to spare her life. To which the girl replied that it was indeed an enemy she could not defeat with her skills. She then thanked him for caring about what people said about her, but she advised him to focus on his own results instead. However, Cruel's nature would not let him leave it at that. He said to her back that Larina was too good, and then he added that this was probably why she would not be strong enough to take the place of the late Archduke Beowulf. Beowulf's successor is his brother's place. However, after his death, this place will be vacant. Perhaps Larina wanted this place. It would be advantageous for her now, or perhaps she even intended to create this opportunity with her own hands. Cruel said all this out loud. He also added that if that was the case, it was really cool and she was a good girl. At this point, the girl's nerves gave way and she asked the only question she could think of. She told Cruel to try to guess whether he would die here. Then he decided to show Larina something, so that she could see with her own eyes that she was no different from him. He used to like that she acted like she was the only one. But now he wanted to tear off her mask and put it on himself. But his plan was not meant to be. At that moment, someone grabbed him by the ear and wouldn't let him move. This someone advised him to finally shut up and stand still. Dwight had already become angry, but this stranger pulled so hard that Cruel fell to his knees. At that moment, they began to announce the first place. The instructor who made the announcement kept the suspense going for a while. Then he loudly announced that first place went to number 974, Young. Everyone was not just impressed, but simply shocked. How could a low-ranking recruit take first place? Some of them began to recall that they had heard about this recruit somewhere before. Larina Beowulf was probably more shocked than the others, although certainly not more than Dwight. His heart seemed to be about to stop. However, he still tried to remove Jan's hand from his ear, at first with threats. A glance was enough for Jan to change tactics. Then he said that it really hurt him. But for some reason, he couldn't melt the recruit's heart, so he shut up. Jan, on the other hand, switched to talking to Ms. Larina. She asked him to call her just Larina without Ms. Interestingly, Larina was even more impressed by the fact that Jan had managed to shut Cruel up than by the exam results. Despite this, she now felt such power from him that she felt like she was about to explode. Now she was haunted by many questions, but right now she wanted to say only one thing. And then she said that Cruel had been cursing Jan for a long time. Maybe it was a lie. But that day, Dwight got what he deserved. That was how he got these apartments. But it was quite difficult to stay in this state for a long time. Jan had taken the book he was reading from the Imperial Military Archives, but he was already getting a little bored with it. And then he tore himself away from his reading. He loudly asked the person standing behind the door to stop. The chief instructor entered the room a little surprised. He reminded him that he had an agreement with Yang, so they needed to do some calculations. And now Jan was standing in front of the instructor. He apologized for not being prepared for his arrival, as he had not known about it. Then he started showering Damien with compliments that were obviously false. The instructor took them as a joke. He said that the Emperor had taken an interest in January. He asked him to take care of the recruit's treatment. This was not convenient for the instructor, even if it was just a passing interest. And although he genuinely felt sorry for the Crown Prince, he planned to destroy Jan. In addition, a report had just arrived that Simmons had arrived in District 52. There is no one there, however, something is not right. They say that no one has lived there for years. The guy immediately began to justify himself, saying that the old forest chief realized he was being followed, so he covered his tracks. But Damien interrupted him. He didn't care if it was a lie or not. It didn't matter anymore. With these words, he smashed the glass with his drink. He had come only to say that he didn't need Yang, and at that moment, he used the shadow sword technique. At first, it seemed that the attack had reached its target, but a moment later, the recruit seemed to melt into thin air. But then he spoke from the corner of the room. Yang had successfully dodged the attack. In his opinion, the instructor would not be able to destroy him, at least because he had found an important piece of the puzzle. Then Damien became really interested. He asked what book the boy was holding. The boy said that he had searched for it specifically on the first floor of the Imperial Archives, among the records of past leaders of the squad. Most of them were research books on training methods and monsters. But finally, one book caught his attention. It had an orange cover. It turned out to be a research paper on arrhythmia written by the leader, Rodrigo. Arrhythmia is a disease in which physical energy does not circulate as it should. Over time, the person becomes weaker. In many cases, they die before the age of 20. Damien looked at the notes, but he didn't understand what the problem was, and what could be so special about it. Jan began to explain. It was very strange that the director had never suffered from arrhythmia, yet he was researching it. So it was a great mystery why Rodrigo was studying this topic, but considering that his daughter always stayed at home, and she looked as if she was running out of strength, one could conclude that it was his daughter who was suffering from arrhythmia. This means that the manager wanted to cure his child and was therefore researching arrhythmia. Yang says he thought the boss was hiding his daughter because she was his weakness. But it turns out that he changed his daughter's place of residence for the sake of treatment. After all, finding a good doctor is not so easy. Damien didn't understand anything anymore. If his weakness isn't his child, then what is the guy trying to say? Meanwhile, the recruit continued. If the boss doesn't take this, the chief instructor may have to keep him on a leash or a lifeline. There is no cure for arrhythmia yet. A large amount of medicine is needed to keep the patient alive. He can't afford it on his own, so he needs money. The best option is to become the head of the Special Forces unit. That way, if it turns out that the unit's funds were stolen, it will be easy to get rid of the old man. However, the instructor had many doubts. Moreover, this story was purely hypothetical. Yang agreed that right now it was just a hypothesis, but if it turned out to be true, they would be able to bury Rodrigo. No matter how you look at it, there were almost no risks. In addition, there was a reason to check whether the squad's funds had been used improperly. After thinking for a while, the instructor expressed his opinion that the idea was not so bad. Then he said that he had his own man in the Special Forces, and Jan needed to find out more about the arrhythmia. And you know what was interesting? The instructor had no choice but to cooperate, and everything Jan said was the absolute truth. In his past life, Jan had learned that the leader had taken money from the Special Forces to cure his daughter's arrhythmia, but something still bothered the instructor. If you look at it that way, Jan refused the third floor and chose the first. Then Yang replied that if it would help the instructor, he didn't need the third floor. Then the instructor decided to give him separate compensation. From that day on, he would not have to follow the basic training program. Yang was surprised and even a little scared. He didn't understand what Demian meant. The instructor replied that from that day on, recruit number 974 would be his student. He then added that, to be honest, he liked Yang. He was different from the other recruits Demian had seen before. Hearing this, Yang was delighted. It was a wonderful opportunity to get closer to the chief instructor. It was truly an honor for him. However, how could someone like him be the student of such a respected person? Then the instructor said that Yang was quite good. He reminded him of his sudden attack, which had almost been successful. However, the recruit objected that he had been caught in the end. He was not a competent person and could tarnish the reputation of the chief instructor. Then Demian couldn't take it anymore. He was annoyed by the boy's whining and the fact that he was too loud. He had been chosen as a student, so he had to remember that and be prepared. As soon as the door slammed shut, Yang was able to breathe easily. He was sweating. Finally, he had a chance to get closer to the instructor, and also to the emblem and the secret of his family. He finally had a chance to find out. In Arena number 3, a personal training center for top-level executives was being opened. Even children from noble families are not allowed to use this arena, and the main character was doing push-ups on it with only one hand, without touching the floor with his feet. It was quite quiet there, and he was alone. Now he decided to rest a little and think about all the recent events. He felt that his body had changed and was in tune with his heart, but the speed of change was too slow. He needed to train for some more time to begin to match his skills. He was able to use this place thanks to his instructor. When everyone found out about the special relationship with the head instructor, the reaction was quite varied, from anger to kindness. Roman accused him of deciding to become the instructor's lapdog. Meanwhile, Casa said how amazing Jan was and offered to be friends. But Lorena didn't say a word, just glared at him, and she started watching him even more closely. The instructor was probably impressed that Jan started on the first floor, but that book was just a decoy. In fact, the situation was a little different. This was the book he really wanted to find, The Birth of an Empire. It may seem like an ordinary history book, but later it will become known that it was written by the emperor and founder of the empire. He now had the heart of mana, but it was in a state where he couldn't fully use the dragon's breath. The breath of the divine dragon is the collaboration between the founder of the empire, Bahamut, and Momon. To fully control the breath of the divine dragon, he needs the power of two. At this time, he needs the knowledge of the founder. When Yang thinks about this, he feels sorry for Momon. Even what he created was taken away from him, and he died, so it's understandable why he became a non-living being. So now he was wondering if there were any clues about the breath of the dragon in the book. However, when he decided to open the book, he was astonished. There was simply nothing there. All the pages were completely blank. Perhaps what the emperor had written was just gossip. But the emperor even sent Momon to the other world to obtain the breath of the divine dragon. It couldn't be that he left nothing behind. At that moment, as he thought about it, a ghostly black hand appeared behind him. Yang turned around sharply. He didn't see it, but he felt it. Maybe it was just his imagination. Then he pretended to turn back to the book, and then suddenly he attacked himself in the back with a shadow sword. He tried to put as much force into this technique as his instructor did, and chopped the column into pieces. But it wasn't even close to the instructor's secret sword technique. Then Jan's attention was drawn to a quiet voice. Someone was giggling behind the column. Then a small dark silhouette appeared. It said that the boy would not be able to unravel the secret of this book. Jan recognized him immediately as soon as he greeted the boy like a crazy kid. It was Momon. To say that the recruit was shocked would be an understatement. It was hard to believe that he could recover from the injuries he had suffered. Lich said he learned one important thing from this story. Even minor mistakes will start to annoy you if you ignore them. Especially mistakes like his. So to start with, he decided to destroy Jan. When Momon attacked, the recruit saw his appearance and was shocked by what he saw. A girl attacked him. Now a girl with white hair and red eyes was screaming at him that she would take his body. But one couldn't be fooled by appearances. Even if he looked like that, he was still a lich. Yang prepared to attack, but when the monster approached him, it simply passed right through him. At first, Yang didn't understand what was happening. The monster just kept passing through him back and forth. At first, he thought Momon had become a ghost. Then he thought it was just a trick of the mind. But then he realized that it was most likely due to the transformation of his life vessel into the heart of mana. He was unquestionable because he had no body, but it quickly began to annoy him, and he was troubled by the question of why Momon was still in this world. But the monster was delighted with his new body. After being dead for 1,000 years, he had returned to what he was when he was still a wizard. Thanks to the influence of the Heart of Mana, the sorcerer Momon was able to regain his human form. Words cannot describe how happy he was. Now that he was back, he was going to destroy every one of them. He would start with Jan and work his way down to the descendants of Bahamut and the entire empire. And so on and so forth, until people began to say that it would be better to destroy those who betrayed the throne. But now something was bothering Jan. The fact that the monster had become smaller. He explained that there was nothing that could be done about it. Instead, it had better power and resource efficiency. But the boy still didn't believe that he would be able to take revenge, especially in this form. However, Momon said that if you look at people from the inside, they all look the same. Besides, it was all because of him. Now the monster maintains his thought form thanks to the magical power of the Heart of Mana. But Yan's magical power was too weak to create the correct thought form. Momon believes that he has too little magical power for a person who drank all of her potions. It would have been better to give all the potions to the dog. At that moment, Yan was thinking about something else entirely. Perhaps this monster was no longer a threat to him. But even so, he feels Mana leaving his body in small fragments. It flows toward Momon. As long as the path is open, there is a chance that Momon will stop him. His opponent was the best sorcerer. If he started to put a spoke in his wheel, then Yang will be powerless to do anything about it. Besides, he will look for an opportunity to destroy him, so there is nothing to be done. Yang said goodbye to Momon and said that even though it was only for a short time, he was glad to see him. The monster asked how he planned to get rid of him. After all, someone like him does not adapt well to mana. The recruit replied that Momon was almost no different from a human. After all, he still had to break the food chain. He said that the monster was like a parasite in his mana heart, sucking power out of him. Then, if the mana supply in his heart was reduced, he would most likely be unable to maintain his thought form. He advised Momon to get out of there. His time was up. But he couldn't accept that. He had survived. It couldn't end like this. He couldn't just disappear. Then he found something to hold on to. The Book of Bahamut. He knew its secret. First, he had to sprinkle it with blood containing the breath of the divine dragon. Next, he had to pour in a little mana. Then the blood would turn into letters. And that's exactly what happened. The blood formed into letters, and the letters formed into sentences. Light and darkness. One or two. Neither Aniyan nor Momon could understand what this Bahamut meant, or what he wanted to say. If you didn't read this nonsense, it was all written by the founding emperor. But then the letters began to glow and rise from the book as if they were alive. The letters that rose began to connect and form new sentences. And then they crawled over John's body. It was hard to believe, but maybe these were sentences inside his body. At first, Jan thought they were gathering inside the Heart of Mana. But then he realized that they were gathering next to him. Perhaps this was the new Heart of Mana. And then he heard a voice that sounded as if it were in his head. The voice said just one word, child. But Jan was so shocked that he dropped the book. Momon watched him the whole time. He couldn't understand what Jan was looking at as if he were hypnotized. These words sobered him up. New combined words. Manya's heart must be formed. This is not just an illusion. Now he was interested in only one thing, namely what great secret Bahamut had hidden. In order to find out, even if it was dangerous, Jan would have to use that boy. The recruit turned to Momon and told him to follow him. He would help him find a way. The sorcerer did not understand what he meant. Then Jan explained that he would help him find a new body. After all, the monster could not be his parasite for the rest of his life. So they needed to try to find it together. Hearing this, Momon was overjoyed. His eyes immediately lit up. He turned into a real charmer. However, Yang advised him not to rejoice too soon. Besides, it would not be free, of course. But Momon had other plans, although he pretended to agree. In reality, as soon as Yang turned away, she immediately revealed her true nature. The sorcerer planned to send John to the other world as soon as he had enough mana. Meanwhile, as expected, Yang felt uncomfortable. He had to get rid of the monster immediately. And although Momon tried to reassure him that everything was fine, and that they were one and the same, Yang did not think so. In an abandoned, half-ruined stadium in the middle of a dense forest, a boy was training alone, his legs and arms cut through the air with incredible speed. He delivered each blow as if he were about to reach his target and destroy it. He put not only physical strength into every blow, but also the power of the divine dragon's breath technique. So after each blow, a bright ray remained in the air for a moment. It was like a comet passing by. But he was not fighting alone. He was not just honing his skills. He was trying to defeat his teacher. He was doing everything possible and impossible to achieve this. This boy was Yang. Now, in addition to being number one among the recruits, he is also a student of the chief instructor, Damien. Unfortunately, no matter how fast he moved, he still couldn't outrun his teacher's reactions. This time, it was not a recruit who attacked. Damien used his main weapon, the Shadow Sword. And just as Yang was about to attack, the instructor struck. All the student managed to do was take a defensive position. He didn't even have time to dodge. But the blow was so strong that it cut through all the columns behind him. And then it exploded in the air, clearing an entire clearing. It was truly incredible. Simply amazing. Dozens of trees were reduced to stumps in an instant. The instructor just laughed. He realized that he had lost some of his skills and felt a real threat to his life. It had been a long time since that had happened to him. It turned out that Yana had been thrown all the way back to those stumps, and now he was hanging upside down on one of them. He began to complain that Damien actually wanted to destroy him. In addition, he asked him to teach him how to use these skills. The instructor replied that he needed to focus his defensive skills on his hands. At that moment, Jan was thinking about what a crazy teacher he had. He uses every possible technique for training. If it weren't for the Emperor's book, which really helped a little, only splinters would remain of the trees. At that moment, the creature that was now almost always with him spoke. It was Momon. He said that the instructor knew how to deal with the black dragon. He also said that he was different from Yang, as he was not such a clown. After that, the monster asked who he was, and when he found out who he was and whose blood flowed in him, he immediately decided that he couldn't just leave him there. Momon tried with all his might to send the instructor to the other world, but all Damien felt was that his shoulders were strangely tense. The instructor really enjoyed this fight. For the first time in a long time, he had fun with his student. Yanu thought it was too easy for him. However, the instructor said that this technique was called the first type of Black Spirit Sword. None of the recruits had ever seen the second type. The reason for this was very simple. No one had yet survived the first type. So he was bursting with curiosity to see how long his student could hold out. Yang was determined. He wanted to learn all the types. Damien was pleased to hear this, but it took about 10 years to master even one. However, the recruit replied that the teacher should not worry about how many types he would be able to master. Now he only needed to worry about how he would carry out all his intentions. For which he immediately received a slap from Damien. It was so strong that he even flew back a little. Then the student smiled and, using the black sword technique, attacked the instructor again. Training every day under the guidance of his instructor, he didn't notice how time flew by. 2 years had already passed. The test results were announced. There were no major changes from the previous test. As expected, Yang surpassed Lorena Beowulf again. He was in first place once more. She couldn't understand it. From that day on, Yang disappeared and didn't attend training, but somehow he became first. So the girl couldn't stop wondering where Yan was and how he was training. Lorena trained every day. She tried to become stronger, so that she could come first in the next exam. But again, Jan won. Then she fought even harder. She trained even more, but Yang pushed her back into second place again. She encountered various monsters. She fought them to become stronger, and she always won, no matter who it was, even level A monsters. She hoped that the next time they met, she would definitely defeat him. But time and time again, she ended up in second place. 2 years passed. The final exam of the third test was underway. During it, the assistant instructor had to be defeated. The results of this sparring match would determine the final composition of the special purpose squad. However, in reality, it was quite boring. In most cases, the outcome of the fight was known from the first seconds. It was more of a grand statement that was nothing more than a formality. Here is Lorena Beowulf. She is an advanced recruit. She ranks second in the overall rating. She is much better than most recruits. A year ago, there wasn't a single assistant instructor who could be her opponent. But if she didn't take part in this test, she wouldn't be able to join the team. So the recruits had no choice but to participate. Jan also had no other choice. Lorena was eagerly waiting to personally test his skills. Then the assistant instructor told him to stop. The test was over. The recruit's score was recorded and he could return to his place. However, the recruit thought otherwise. He continued to attack the instructor. In his opinion, a fight cannot end just because someone asks for it to. It only ends when the opponent is dead. This was Cruel Dwight, an advanced recruit who was ranked third in the overall rating table. And until the fight was over, he wanted to have some fun. In his opinion, because this guy was wearing an instructor's uniform, he was treating a nobleman badly. Lorena watched this. She understood that Cruel was just playing with him. It was horrible. Someone behind her said that this lunatic was acting like a piece of shit. Another agreed wholeheartedly. One of them turned out to be Roman, fourth in the rankings. In his opinion, after the instructor stopped coming, Cruel began to consider this place his world. Kesa Ifrain, who was fifth in the rankings, responded to him. He offered to help Roman with the assistant. He felt sorry for him. However, Roman replied that this assistant had destroyed many low-ranking recruits, so he didn't feel sorry for him at all, and Kasa joked that he was just scared. Meanwhile, Lorena thought about Dwight. Although he had a bad temper at first, he didn't seem crazy. Recently, he had taken the life of a training assistant. He seemed to have calmed down over the past 2 years. However, no one wanted to have anything to do with Dwight. Even Roman avoided him, although he didn't want to admit it. Then the assistant instructor's sword broke. He fell to the ground. Cruel took full advantage of the opportunity to mock him. In his opinion, what kind of assistant was he if he couldn't even fight anymore? However, at that moment, Lorena's nerves snapped. Spikes of ice grew up right under Cruel's feet. He barely managed to jump out of the way. For a second, the guy didn't even understand what had happened, but then it dawned on him. Lorena explained that she didn't want to interfere, but she couldn't just stand by and watch what he was doing. The Beowulf's weapon was the ice sword. It was thanks to it that she possessed the element of ice. In order to avoid encountering the Dwight family, Lorena decided to defeat him here silently. Cruel just laughed when he heard this. He wanted to take care of her after she finished her training. But since the opportunity had presented itself, he decided to make the most of it. So he decided to do everything in his power to make this the final test for both Lorena and John. Lorena was not afraid for a moment. Cruel always chose weak opponents for himself. In her opinion, it was time for Dwight to fight someone stronger. The boy just kept laughing. He said that their princess was talking proudly as always, but Lorena's morale only grew stronger and stronger. And then their battle began. For 2 years, they had been harboring resentment toward each other, and now they could finally vent it all. Lorena suggested that he take a sword after all, because he didn't have a sword left from the previous sparring match. However, Cruel refused, saying that his bare hands would be enough against someone like her. Their battle was truly spectacular. Kasa and Roman watched them. Roman thought the outcome of the fight was clear, but Kasa thought they were evenly matched. Roman believes that although insignificant, Lorena is superior to Cruel. So after 30 moves, it will be difficult for Dwight to catch up. That would be nice, but Cruel sometimes radiates a strange energy. The secret ceremony of the squad is not the most important thing for the Dwight family. Moreover, unlike Lorena, he actually wants to send her to the other world. However, Roman believed that a guy lower than him in the rankings couldn't know better. Kasa tried to make him understand that he used to be in third place, and that he didn't really care about his ranking. Roman replied that he knew what Ifrain cared about. After all, they had created a private organization. It already had about 80 members. In his opinion, it was more like a fan club. Perhaps Kasa was very busy recruiting nobles. The recruit replied that Roman was doing the same thing. After all, he had created a military organization and was gathering recruits who had previously been slaves. There were 56 of them in total. Kasa expressed his concern that they could escape at any moment. This surprised recruit number 4 a little. He said that Ifrain was too interested in them. Kasa replied that Roman was also very interested in them. As expected, the game ended. It seemed that the battle in the arena was over. Lorena put her sword to Cruel's throat. This tore the boys away from their own argument. She said that if Dwight relied only on his own strength, he would find himself in situations like this. So he needed to learn humility. Cruel was about to agree, but at that moment, something in his subconscious rebelled against it. Was he really going to swallow this again? This entity in his subconscious began to press on his pain. Poor Cruel, he always loses and everything is taken away from him. Just like this time. If he had fought and destroyed everyone in his path, they wouldn't have taken anything from him, said the entity. It reminded him of all the things Cruel wanted so badly but couldn't have. She reminded him of the mansion and the family inheritance, and also of his father's love. Poor, unfortunate Cruel. But if he fought and destroyed everything, they wouldn't take anything away from him. All of it could be his. Dwight listened to this voice as if spellbound, and then he agreed with everything he heard. His eyes filled with tears. At that moment, he made a fateful decision. Then Cruel smiled and looked straight into Lorena's eyes. He asked her if she was really ready. At first, she didn't understand what he meant. He repeated whether she was really ready to send him to the other world. Having said that, he moved his neck a little closer to the girl's sword so that blood flowed. This frightened Lorena. She didn't understand what Dwight was talking about. Then he explained that some people would rather die than lose. Frightened, the girl moved the sword away. She did not understand how he could say such a thing. Why was he stooping so low? As expected, she couldn't do it, and Cruel seemed possessed. In an instant, he flew at Lorena and attacked her. He threw her into the air, cutting her body. The girl's blood was everywhere. It was clear that he was not afraid to destroy her. On the contrary, he wanted to do it. But just as he was about to finish Lorena off, something red flashed between them and deflected Dwight's attack. The boy was shocked. A wolf was standing in front of him. It was the wolf who had deflected his blow, but how it had done so remained a mystery. At that moment, someone called the wolf back. It turned out that his name was Black Devil. Everyone heard a very familiar voice. Roman was the first to realize who it belonged to. It was January. He looked completely different now. He had let his hair grow down to his shoulders. He had matured. He lifted the unconscious Lorena. Everyone who was watching froze. Cruel was the first to speak. He believed that luck was on his side today. He decided to defeat both of his rivals at once. Jan carefully laid Lorena as far away as possible. He told her to rest for now. He left the Black Devil to watch over her. Cruel immediately began to make jokes about Lorena befriending a mongrel, and about how John had spent the last 2 years learning at the circus. Young did not respond to these jokes directed at him. He only replied that Dwight had not changed a bit over the years. Momon, who was always near John, became interested in this boy. Cruel was able to defeat him with a magical attack. After that, she asked him if he could see how much darkness there was in this boy now. Yang realized that things had gone too far. If he wasn't stopped now, he would soon become a demon. Cruel was tired of Yang muttering to himself, so he decided not to wait and attack. Jan, however, did not even move. He only said that he knew Cruel's future. He would regret it. Then he heard a familiar phrase. He was too noisy. But perhaps it was familiar only to Yang. A figure appeared at the main entrance. She said that in 2 years, everyone had become so arrogant. The recruits recognized this energy. It was the chief instructor. He said he would make one last announcement. So they had to shut up and get everything sorted out. So they had to move quickly. After all, it would be a shame to die on the last day. All the recruits gathered in front of the instructor. He praised everyone. At the beginning, there were 1,000 recruits. Now there were only 200 left. The final assessment depended 50% on military strength and skills, and 50% on the change in mana level. The final score is made up of these two. They are no longer recruits, so instead of numbers, they will be given new ranks. They will all be Imperial Knights. These are knights who control mana. There are 10 levels that indicate a knight's strength. The 10th is the lowest. The 1st is the highest. The instructor decided to remind everyone what each level means. The 10th is a knight apprentice who uses mana. The 9th is a knight who possesses Danjin or Sogol. The 8th is a person capable of pronouncing the name of a sword. The 7th is a person who can manifest energy on objects. The 6th is a person who can carry a sword or its energy on their body. The 5th is a knight capable of revealing the art of fencing using the energy of a sword. The 4th is a person who can draw a sword. After listing the levels, their announcement began, starting with the first number. When it was all over, Yang walked through the dormitory of the senior recruits of the Special Purpose Unit. It seemed like 2 years had passed since he last had a place like this to live. As they walked, Momon decided to ask him about the qualification levels and what it all meant. In short, there's a division into knightly ranks like magic circles. Many recruits receive the 7th or 8th level. This may seem low, but with this level, you can hunt most monsters on your own. The Elite Four received the 6th level. If you have the 6th level at this age, it means you are the best of the best. Here, behind him, Yang heard a girl's voice. She said that Yang had changed over the past 2 years. It was Lorena. They hadn't seen each other in a long time except for their meeting in the arena. She started the conversation about their meeting. She was annoyed that he had interfered. In Lorena Beowulf's opinion, she simply could not lose. This surprised Young a little, that she was starting their first conversation in 2 years with a complaint. However, the girl had no intention of stopping. She thinks that John is just showing off because he reached the 5th level. The only person who had reached level 5 at the age of 17 was the Crown Prince. If you surpass the skills of level 5, you would soon be able to call yourself a master swordsman. After that, Lorena left. She said one last thing, that his hairstyle didn't suit him. He replied that she had a bad temper. Walking down the corridor, she remembered her brother. He had also reached the 5th level. But he told her that he was not the best because of his royal highness. Perhaps it was shame. It was childish, but she didn't want to admit that Yang had surpassed her brother. Meanwhile, Yang walked away talking to Momon, but now he couldn't stop thinking about his hairstyle. The wizard wondered why the boy was hiding his power. If he didn't do that, he would be far from the 5th level. Yang replied that it was enough for now. It was better to show just enough power to attract moths. At that moment, in a room on the training grounds, Damien was talking to senior instructor Zach. The chief instructor said that he never thought Yang would exceed his expectations so much. The others were probably scared of him, especially that Black Devil. Damien had never taught him that. I wonder if he used the Black Spirit Sword. Then Zach spoke up. In his opinion, the chief instructor was too fond of this recruit. Besides, leaving him in that state was a violation of the training center's discipline. However, Demian did not appreciate his attempts to express his opinion. It only annoyed him, so Zach had to apologize. As soon as the chief instructor left, it turned out that several others were standing behind this instructor and watching the conversation. As they expected, Damien could no longer be trusted, and the instructor himself wanted to get to John as soon as possible. It was already early in the morning. Jan had slept peacefully all night. But in the early hours of the morning, the monster decided to show itself. He climbed on top of the main character. In his opinion, this body now belonged to him. He had been gathering strength for the last 2 years. He was waiting for his chance. After all, Momon was not one to give up so easily. And then he put his hand on Yang's head and used a mind control technique. He was in no hurry. Little by little, step by step, he would gain control over his body. But his plans were ruined. Jan woke up and opened his eyes. At that moment, a huge wolf was ready to tear Momon's head off. And now the Imperial Knight ordered him to get off him. He had already warned him that if he caught him doing this again, he would wipe him out. However, the knight believed he had the right to do so because Yang would not give him his body. Just as the knight was about to answer him, someone knocked on the door. It was unclear who it could be so early in the morning. Behind the door stood the senior instructor. All the instructors' faces were hidden behind masks, so it was impossible to tell who it was. He said that the chief instructor, Demian, was looking for him. He was ordered to accompany the boy. They walked together down the free trade alley of the Special Purpose Unit. Jan had many questions. The main one was why the instructor needed him at all. After all, the exams were over. And he was also curious about this strange place. Then he asked if Demian had really called for him. The instructor realized that he couldn't get out of it, and Jan figured it out pretty quickly, so the man had no choice but to attack. He used a dark attack, but when he turned around, Jan was already gone. And then he heard a voice right above his ear. He was not only quick to think, but also quick to move. Yang used the 7th type of dark spirit technique, close combat. The instructor was immediately knocked away. His hood fell back, revealing his face. It was the instructor, Jacques. He didn't understand how the former recruit had managed to notice his attack. Yang just laughed. How could he not notice after everything he had been through? He didn't understand why the instructor hadn't been trained a little better in the art of stealth. The instructor only got angry at this. However, that wasn't what worried the boy. He felt the energy coming from Jacques' sword, a blood-red sword. He tried to remember where he had seen such swords being used before, but Yang didn't ask about it. He doubted that Demian knew about all this, so he asked what the instructor was going to do about the consequences. Jacques became even more angry. He believed that Jean had become arrogant because he had received the highest rank. In his opinion, the boy was just lucky. At that moment, more instructors attacked Jean from different sides. He was not afraid at all. On the contrary, he sarcastically said that there were too many of them, and he could not defeat them all. And then he really couldn't defeat them. He sat there tied up and couldn't believe what had happened. Momon, who was standing nearby, asked him what he was doing. However, Jan told him to shut up. The instructors began to ask Jacques why they had done all this. They asked him to deal with him quickly in return. The boy asked where he had gone wrong. He did not understand why they were doing this. Then Jacques asked if he remembered what had happened 2 years ago, when he had helped several recruits escape from the squad's territory. Many instructors were sent to search for them, but they all died at his hands. Among them was the younger brother of the senior instructor, the commander of Pursuit Squad number 3, Kelly. He remembered how his brother writhed in terrible pain, and he would probably never forget that face. From that moment on, he waited impatiently for the day when he could avenge his brother. Wishing him a happy journey to hell, he swung his unusual blade at Jan. Jan begged him to let him go, but he wouldn't listen. He wanted the boy to pay with his life. Then Jan had to call the Black Wolf. He used the Black Spirit sword technique. The wolf emerged and grabbed the instructor by the arm. The boy said that his brother had done his job well. However, they were fighting for their lives, and Kelly lost. There was no room for compassion in this fight. Besides, it was the instructors who made the recruits this way. So it was hard for him to believe that they had gone to such lengths just because of a personal grudge. The instructors didn't understand what he was talking about. Meanwhile, Yang continued, saying that they could probably be called rebels now. The Armenian uprising ultimately ended in defeat, but it shook the entire empire and the continent. There was a group that rose to lead the numerous rebels. Uniting various rebels, they called themselves the Order of the Revolution, the Order of the Red Revolution. They named themselves after their weapon, the Red Revolution. Their swords were always drenched in blood. Therefore, they learned to use their own blood to create a blood-red aura around their swords. Battles with the Order of the Red Revolution were always bloody. It is believed that the Red Revolution is a technique created by the leader of the order. It is said that even with the same level of strength as their opponents, knights who use the Red Revolution can deliver blows with greater destructive power. However, this technique had a drawback. To use it, one had to burn blood. To overcome this flaw, the Red Army resorted to vampirism. Yang said that the rebels were preparing a revolt. He was just about to meet with them when they came to him, so he thanked them for saving him time. After that, he asked who they were subordinate to. He had 2 options, either the chief instructor or someone else from the training center. Jacques did not understand how he knew this. However, he did not really care. Since Yang mentioned the Order of the Revolution, according to the senior instructor, he would not die peacefully. Then he loudly announced that the Red Revolution was beginning. All the other instructors confirmed this in unison. After that, their swords glowed red and they rushed to attack the boy. Yang decided that if they used their skills against a higher-ranking recruit, then he would not hold back either. Then he ordered the Black Wolf to appear, and it seemed to merge with Yang's hand. His arm turned into a long sword. This was also a technique of the Black Spirit sword form. The instructors couldn't believe their eyes. This was an instructor's technique. It was impossible for someone his age to be so strong. When they attacked, Yang only swung his sword once. Just 1 strike. But that was enough. Probably the whole neighborhood saw the black and red light that flashed for a few seconds from the place of their battle. The boy defeated them. Jacques was the only one left. He sat on the floor, unable to comprehend how this was even possible. This recruit was a monster. Jacques asked what he was. Maybe he was an Imperial spy. Jan remained silent. Then he asked how he knew who they were. He didn't want to believe that the chief instructor had betrayed them. However, the guy wasn't going to answer. He pressed his boot on the instructor's leg and said that he was the one asking the questions here. He then assured him that if Jacques answered all his questions, he would spare his life. He took a medallion out of his jacket. It was the same one that had once held a photograph of his family. But now only the symbol that had been a clue for the recruit remained. He asked the instructor if he had seen such a pattern before. Jacques recognized it immediately. Finally, Jan had found someone who knew what it was. The instructor did not understand where someone like him could have gotten the symbol. The boy bombarded him with questions about the symbol. What did it mean? Whose coat of arms was it? How was it related to the instructor? Who else had it? However, at that moment, Jacques' face began to be covered with some kind of bubbles. He tried to say something, but nothing came out. In the end, his head simply exploded. Jan's first thought was suicide. But Momon disagreed. He said that a taboo had been placed on him, one that he himself probably didn't know about. It was a spell that forbade a person from performing certain actions or uttering certain words. If broken, the magic would drain the person's blood and energy, causing them to explode. Whoever cast it, they were very concerned about his safety. Momon had already hinted at this. In any case, Yang got at least some clue. The symbol was connected to the chief instructor and the rebels. And his parents are also involved in this. He has a bad feeling about all this. Yang decided to tell Damien everything. However, in the opinion of the healer, destroying all his subordinates and then going to report it was not a very good idea. Besides, it was probably him who sent them, but he hardly wanted to kill his student. Perhaps he wanted John to destroy them. At that moment, the instructor appeared right behind him. He smiled and said that no master would order his student to kill his subordinates. However, Jacques Duct had been too insolent with him lately, so he needed to be taught a lesson. With that, Jan's report was complete and he could leave. Tomorrow, his real mission would begin. So he needed to get some rest. With his current level of skill, he had a lot of work ahead of him. Somewhere in the wilderness, a transcontinental train was traveling to the northern lands of the Beowulf family. People sat in the carriages, the conductor walked around checking tickets. Everything was normal. Only one passenger on this train was unusual. It was the 5th night of the Special Purpose Squad, January. One would like to say that he was just traveling by train because exams were over and it was time to relax. But of course that wasn't the case. He was heading north on a mission. After the exam, the surviving recruits became full members of the squad. They were immediately sent on missions. They were sent in all 4 directions, north, south, east, and west of the Empire, across the entire continent. Each direction had its own tasks. The eastern lands bordered the territory of the undead and the dead. Casa and 80 soldiers under his command were sent there. The strange west, where mysterious phenomena occur and monsters dwell, was assigned to Roman and 50 of his knights. 60 high-ranking soldiers were sent to the stormy south, with its fierce storms and pirates. The harsh north, bordering the frozen lands and the territory of barbarians, fell to John and 3 others. Very few people were called to go north, probably because of the cold where even dragons freeze. At first, Jan thought it was even better this way. There were almost no people, which meant it would be quieter. However, the detachment was rather dubious. He knew 2 of the 3 knights better than he would have liked. They were 6th rank knights, Cruel and Larina. There was also an 8th rank knight named Charlie, whom he did not know. It seemed that all the most problematic individuals had been gathered here. Cruel was already picking on Larina, saying that she was following him. In his opinion, she wanted to take revenge on him. He shouted throughout the carriage, but Larina did not react. Her indifference angered him even more. At that moment, Charlie spoke up. She told him to shut his filthy mouth. Then she added that that was probably what Lady Larina would like to say. Only then did Dwight notice her. He didn't understand who she was. Maybe some kind of servant. Charlie objected. She said she had been accompanying Lady Larina since the exam in the Blade Mountains. She had decided to stay with her until the end when Beowulf saved her life. Before that, no one had ever stood up for the girl. Then they started arguing again about why Larina wouldn't tell him to shut up herself. The noise began to annoy Yana. He didn't understand why it was so difficult to ride in silence. Cruel, noticing his dissatisfaction, thought about the real reason why he had gone north. It was all because of John. He wanted nothing more than to destroy him. From the moment they first met, John had always gotten in his way and made him look bad. But now that they had left the training center, he could attack him at any moment. Thinking about this, Cruel began to very carefully take out his knife so that Jan would not hear him. However, at that moment, the 5th rank knight asked how many times he would strike. Dwight immediately realized what trouble he was in. He decided to choose one. However, Jan said that he had guessed wrong, and at that moment his fist flew towards Cruel's face. Meanwhile, Larina was not thinking about what was happening around her. She was tormented by thoughts of her homeland. She couldn't even imagine that she would return to her homeland so soon. The last time she was here, she had a falling out with the head of the Beowulf clan. He said he didn't want to hear anything. If she mentioned that name one more time, she would be sent into exile. Then she left her homeland without a second thought, but she was unable to find out anything about her brother. But she couldn't return empty-handed. She sat and pondered this until the others realized what she was thinking about. Noticing how quiet Larina had been all day, Jan concluded that she was not very happy to return to her homeland. However, she would soon hear news that would open her eyes. He hoped she would be surprised. A voice from the loudspeaker announced that the train had arrived in Avalon. At that moment, John heard some shouting in the carriage. A young man was trying to persuade an elderly man to stop in Avalon. Leon might be disappointed, he said. However, the man replied that he would not go there under any circumstances. The Crown Prince's education was complete. There was nothing more to teach him. So why bother going there? That is why Yang chose the north. At first glance, he may seem like a grumpy old man with a bad temper, but in fact, this old man's name is Vigor. He is the teacher of the Emperor and the Crown Prince. He is considered the chief sage of the Empire. It was for him that Yang came here. He is a commoner who never possessed knowledge of magic or martial arts. However, he became a remarkable man, and for his knowledge of philosophy, he earned incredible respect. For these merits, the Emperor awarded him the title of Count. In his past life, he lived a life befitting his title. After the uprising, he begged the Emperor for 3 days and 3 nights to pay attention to the suffering of his people, shedding bloody tears. But his reward for this loyalty was death. That moment is still far away. There is still time. Now the conductor approached the old man, apologized for the inconvenience, and said that all those who had caused concern had left the train. He also said that a separate compartment had been prepared for Vigor. The old man immediately agreed. However, as he was leaving, he kept his hand behind his back, passing a message to someone in sign language. Seeing this, Yang realized that something more was going on, and he had been waiting for this. An assassination attempt on the Emperor's teacher. The train then passes through a tunnel, so that is when it will happen. He was loyal to the Empire, not the Emperor, and he was ready to sacrifice his life for his country and its people. The revolutionaries considered him overly annoying, so they decided to kidnap him. The sign language used by the conductor was unique. It was used only by revolutionaries. Then a mechanical voice announced loudly that the train would stop in the tunnel due to technical problems. But everyone had to stay in their seats. Yang had been waiting for this. He had a chance to save the old man and befriend him. Through a mental connection, he told all members of his squad to be on standby. They were to listen carefully and not give any signals. He informed them that their enemies had taken control of the train. In an hour, when the train entered the tunnel, they were going to attack a VIP. The attackers were disguised as conductors, and possibly as passengers as well. He wanted to say something else. However, Cruel interrupted him. In his opinion, since they had not even received their orders yet, they should not listen to Jan. However, the 5th rank knight quickly calmed him down with a blow to the nose. He asked if anyone else had any questions. Lorena did not quite understand what was going on and where Jan had gotten such information. The boy replied that he had received a secret mission from his instructor. That was why he had chosen Midnight. Then she calmed down a little and asked who their enemies were. Jan replied that he didn't know their exact number, but he knew who they were. The Revolutionary Army. They were involved in the kidnapping of a VIP. After a while, the conductors began to spray sleeping gas to move the passengers to the freight car. Then they noticed that there were members of the squad among them. The moment he said this to the others, someone behind him asked him why the conductors needed weapons. When he turned around, it was too late. All he had time to see was a girl flying at him with a sword. A second later, he was wounded, but not with an ordinary sword, but with an icy one. They all immediately understood who they were dealing with, the Beowulf family. However, they were not very frightened. The members of the Revolutionary Army knew that the knights of the squad would be on the train, but they had no idea that the little lion cub of the Beowulfs would end up with them. They were delighted. They dreamed that they might be promoted or paid a ransom. All this made Lorena very angry. They should know what her family would do to them if anything happened. The girl left her home and joined the special forces just to find them and find out how her brother had disappeared. And they obediently came to her. She thanked them profusely. The guides were still amused. After all, she knew for sure what her family had done. While the Beowulfs bathe in luxury, their families eat nothing but rotten garbage, and in their opinion, they are to blame for this. To which she replied that her family was following the path of defending the Empire and the North, so she would not let them win because they were a threat to the Empire. They were the spawn of evil. At that moment, all the glass windows in the carriage shattered and flew out. Several more people rushed to their aid. After all, they had not been in contact for a long time. But Cruel Dwight stood in their way. He was looking for someone to take his anger out on. The sword he used to kill them was from the Emperor's treasury. In Cruel's opinion, it was simply magnificent. Looking at all the pools of blood, he realized how much he had missed this sight. It would be a short wait before Yang was next. Cruel was sure of it. Meanwhile, John summoned Momon. He was dissatisfied that such a youngster was constantly calling him for no reason. However, Jan replied that he had no choice as the boy had not yet paid off his debt. Then the ancient lich gave in and reported that he sensed magic in the first carriage. Now they had to hurry. They had to save the wise old man. Lorena blocked the enemies in the front carriages. Cruel took care of those in the rear. Yan himself had to sneak into the locomotive through the roof. Momon appreciated their cunning plan. He also added that the little girl Lorena was more talented than he had thought. It was good that John hadn't killed her last time. She was like a time bomb. But Lich couldn't understand why they needed the old man at all. Jan said that was also part of his plan. They would have to face the army of revolution more than once. The old man was their trump card in this game. If he was on their side, the fight would be much easier. In Momon's opinion, he was too cautious. However, Yang was no longer listening to him. They had to hurry. At that moment, the old man was already sitting bound on the floor of the compartment. He was being interrogated. In front of him sat Hela, the third disciple of the world sword Erectus. She was the commander of the 7th Legion of the Order of the Revolution. She couldn't believe that the old man in front of her was really the Emperor's teacher. If he was so smart, he must know ancient languages and proverbs. Vigor replied that he knew a little. Then she asked if he knew the language of dogs and asked him to bark so she could be sure. At first, he didn't know what to say, but then he started barking. Hela laughed, and the old man said that it meant that this lady was very beautiful. Jan and Momon were already standing on the roof of their carriage discussing their plan of action when they heard the old man demonstrating the cat language to someone. Lich doubted whether this man would really be of any use to them. However, John replied that he had always been a peculiar man. One thing scared him the most, that he was always ready to give up his pride for the good of the Empire. He was a utilitarian. After laughing heartily, Hela said that her grandfather was simply incredible. She had destroyed all the scholars of the Empire because they were too arrogant. However, work is work. With these words, she grabbed the hilt of the sword. And although her grandfather was very funny, she had to complete the task. Then she used magic to strengthen her muscles several times over. It was time to catch these rats, and Hela swung her sword with all her might. The blow broke the roof of the train. White light poured out. She liked it. The old train was swarming with rats. They all had to be caught. Then she heard someone squeak. Someone behind her was imitating a mouse. When she turned around, she saw a 5th rank knight of the Special Purpose Squadron standing before her. Yang asked if the sage was all right. He said he was there to save him. The old man praised him for his good work. After all, Yang had managed to get here while he was distracting the enemy. Heli didn't like being forgotten, so she drew attention to herself. She said that he must know how to speak the language of pigs because he was about to squeal like a piglet. However, Yang said that she was the one squealing like a pig. While she was insulting the boy, Momon informed him that this mad woman's rank was no higher than 5th. However, her sword had a unique energy, a blade with a white aura, the color of Erectus's light sword. He was famous for how he trained his students. It seems that she is one of his students. We must deal with her as soon as possible. But at that moment, someone behind him told him not to move. Otherwise, the old man would lose his head. It was Erectus's 4th disciple, Varus. His talent was secrecy. Jan did not expect this. After all, Momon said there were only 2 people here. She had only sensed 2 people with magical abilities. It turned out that she had mistaken the old man for an enemy. After all, she could not sense people without magic. Jan had to drop his sword. He asked if she wanted to hear him scream again. However, Heli said that now she wanted to hear something else, namely how his skull would crack when she smashed it. Meanwhile, Lorena Beowulf was still fighting members of the Army of Revolution. Her sword moved elegantly and easily as if it had wings. She used the Beowulf vision technique. And again, all the glass flew out after her attack, and the entire salon was covered in ice. Her enemies froze like ice sculptures. They couldn't move a finger. After that, she wanted to use Winter's Arrival. However, she was unable to complete the technique. She overloaded herself by summoning frost and her body was not ready for it, so she started coughing up blood. She would not be able to use snow magic for a long time. This was clearly not in their favor. At that moment, someone behind her said that she had caused quite a commotion. A man was standing there. He said that it was too rough for a descendant of Beowulf. It was different from what he had been told. Lorena didn't know who he was. He neutralized the frost with dark energy. Despite this, he left the carriage where Cruel was. This man did not really believe that she was truly a girl from the Beowulf family. Lorena did not wait. She immediately attacked, but she was curious to know how he found out about her. At that moment, Cruel was sitting in the rear of the train. He was covered in his own blood. Dwight could not stop this monster. None of his past opponents could compare to him. Lorena put all her strength into her blow. However, her opponent caught it with just his fingers. This man was even stronger than the chief instructor. However, he apologized if he had offended her. He felt very sorry for her. If they hadn't met here, he wouldn't have had to destroy her. Lorena was unable to respond to these words. All that could be heard was the sound of blood splattering, and then silence. At that moment, Charlie was sitting somewhere behind the suitcase. She had been forced to hide, which she was very unhappy about. After all, she was also an Imperial Knight. She was most worried about Lady Lorena. She had promised to always protect her. Lorena was in bad shape. She was lying on the floor with blood flowing from her head. However, despite her terrible condition, she was still ready to continue fighting. What a pity. If she hadn't gotten up, she would have stayed alive. She was a pretty smart girl. She should have known she didn't stand a chance. However, Lorena had no intention of giving up. He was right in saying that she was not like the other Beowulfs. She is too emotional, and she is not very skilled with a sword. She cannot even use her inherited magic properly. But she could still die like Beowulf. She can't defeat him, but she can fight to her last breath. Every battle of a true warrior is a duel to the death. She made a big mistake. He was nicknamed the Black Tiger named Amur. He will show her what he is capable of. Having said that, Amur used the Black Tiger attack technique. At that moment in the first car, Varys and Heli were completely crushed. They couldn't believe they had lost. After all, there were more of them, and Yang was defenseless. They had also taken the old man hostage, so it was simply impossible. Varys did not understand how this was possible or why, to which Yang replied that it was a very strange question. It was all because they were weak. The wise man asked if it was over. The boy replied that it was, but that he'd better stay close. Varys still asked how he had dodged all the attacks, every single blow. It was all because Yan remembered how he had defeated their lightsword teacher Erectus in a past life. He had already broken that sword once before. Besides, they were just students, not Erectus himself. He would never lose. After that, the knight asked Varys if he wanted to live. Of course he did. If he answered Jon's question, he would spare his life. He showed him the same medallion he had shown Jacques. Varys immediately recognized the symbol. He was overcome with either surprise or horror. He replied that it was the symbol of the beginning, but he could say nothing more. His face began to wrinkle as if covered with bubbles. The same thing happened to the instructor. It was taboo again. Varys did not understand why this was happening. He hadn't even said anything. If even a student of the light sword was taboo, then this was indeed a serious matter. He didn't hear another word from them. However, he did manage to find out something. He had to understand what the symbol of the beginning meant. Now all that was left for the old man and his companions was to get off the train. At that moment, something exploded in the train ahead. It was so loud and bright that surely everyone on the train heard or saw it. When Yang saw the explosion, he did not understand what could have caused it. At that moment, Heli, who was lying there barely breathing, laughed. She explained that the engine room had exploded. Now the train couldn't be stopped. If nothing was done, the overheated magic engine would not stop at Avalon Station, but would crash into it, and they would all be blown up. The only thing she regretted was that she wouldn't be able to see it. However, this had never happened in Yana's past life. So why did it happen now? Momon appeared. In his opinion, it was time for them to get off the train. After all, they had to survive this disaster. This pile of metal couldn't be stopped. If it really was powered by a magical engine, the explosion would reach the heavens. However, the boy advised her not to panic. It was unexpected, but the monster standing in front of the train would solve this problem. He was a royal knight of the 7th rank. His name was Kyle. The emperor ordered him to save the old man, but it would not be easy to stop an uncontrolled train. Royal knights were the best knights in the entire empire, protecting the emperor and the capital. It is said that only superhumans of the 3rd rank and above are accepted into their order. According to rumors, the fighting power of each knight is equal to the force of a natural disaster. Well, there's nothing to be done. He can't stop this train just like that. Apologizing to Lord Vigor, he used the Imperial Sword's final strike. A blow of tremendous force swept through the entire train. The engine room was simply reduced to dust. Yang realized what was happening and thought it was too much. The front of the train was smashed. The remaining cars derailed and were engulfed in flames. Kyle stood as if he had done nothing and spoke of how ruthless the warriors of the revolution were. After all, they had committed such a terrible act. The wise man standing behind him did not understand what he was talking about because it was his doing. The royal knight immediately felt uncomfortable. He said he was very glad that the old man had survived and asked if anything was bothering him. To which Vigor replied no and added that he had miraculously survived. After all, he could have perished along with the train. Then Kyle became even more nervous and, seeing Lorena, began to say that he believed that Lady Beowulf would cope and be able to protect him. As he had predicted, the young lady struck the railroad tracks, derailing the train. As a result, only a few cars were damaged. The hostages and the sage were rescued. Lorena began to say that it was not she who had derailed the train. However, at that moment, someone put a hand on her shoulder and said that it didn't matter anymore. It was Cruel who pretended that this was a self-evident assessment of the situation for the members of the Special Forces. Kyle realized that there were other natural talents in the squad besides Beowulf. Cruel replied that he was close to first place. Charlie, who was standing nearby, wanted to protest, but Cruel wouldn't let her say anything. Lorena turned to Mayor Kyle and told him that among the attackers was a black tiger named Aimer, an elite assassin who got his nickname from his characteristic black energy, reminiscent of a tiger's aura. He reached the 3rd rank 10 years ago. It is difficult to imagine what rank he holds now. Kyle had to fight him, but he is no match for Amur. When the train derailed, he sensed the knight's approach and disappeared. Before leaving, he said that they would meet again, but Lorena did not tell Kyle about this. This means that the Black Tiger has joined the rebels. The knight was surprised that Beowulf was able to stand up to him. Lorena wanted to argue, but then she closed her mouth. Now was not the time. On the other side of the train, Jan was bandaging wounds and burns. Momon clung to him, clearly worried about the body she wanted to get her hands on. But Jan was more concerned that things were happening now that had never happened in his past life. This was very bad. There had been no Black Tiger attacks, no appearance of Kyle, and no train explosions in his past life, and no one knew why this was happening now. From the beginning, there were no volunteers in the north. The situation changed when Jan headed there. Maybe that's why the Black Tiger appeared in the north. His actions set off a chain reaction. It is unknown how far it could go, so we need to be careful. His thoughts were interrupted by an old man who approached him. He was looking for him because he wanted to talk. Perhaps it would have been better to stay in the capital. Vigora was burdened by the thought that so many people had suffered because of him. Even the hand that Jan had bandaged. He had injured himself when the train derailed, and that was also his fault. To which Jan replied that it was true. The wise man had caused him a lot of trouble. The old man was surprised by such directness. But he continued. He said that he was indebted to him, and he handed Yang a small tablet. The young man recognized it immediately. It was the old man's nameplate, confirming that Jan was his agent. The main character understood how useful it would be to him, but he did not want to limit himself to that. He asked if the old man thought he would take it and immediately forget how he had cursed him like a dog. Vigor was surprised for the second time by the boy's straightforwardness. However, it was time for him to go. Finally, he said that perhaps fate would bring them together again. When he left, Yang was finally able to breathe easily. At last, everything had worked out, even though he had to work hard for it. Momon didn't understand how this tablet could be so useful. The boy replied that it depended on how you used it. Now it was time for them to move on to their next destination, to the land of eternal frost. The man in the shop gave Jan his sword. He wondered how he had managed to damage a sword made of black iron. He had to pay 500 Jalis for the repair, and then he could take it back. It was quite expensive. This black sword made of ink steel was a gift from his instructor. With a normal blade, he would not have been able to use the Dark Dragon sword technique, but even ink iron cannot withstand it. The blacksmith hugged him goodbye, showing all his kindness, although you wouldn't say he was very friendly from his face. This was the town of Billion, not far from the Beowulf estate. They decided to stop here. Due to bad weather and the destruction of the railway, it was decided to use the portal to travel to the Beowulf. Considering the time needed to recharge the magic circle's mana, the portal could not be used until noon the next day. Since Billion is a small town, it will take time to accumulate magical energy. The heroes also need time to rest. For the first time since his rebirth, Young found himself in a place where there were so many ordinary people. Momon sat on Yang's head and muttered something under his breath about the royal knight they had met. He couldn't understand how Yang didn't sense the yellow dragon's aura emanating from the knight. However, Yang didn't even know what the aura of the yellow dragon was. Momon was angry at such ignorance. The boy didn't know what power he possessed. The heart of mana can hold 6 types of energy: black, red, blue, green, gold, and earth. The highest form of golden power is the yellow dragon. However, Yang did not understand how this could be possible without the heart of mana. After all, it was just an attribute. His nerves were on edge. If it were that easy, anyone could found a state. Only the breath of the dragon and the heart of mana can manifest the power of the dragon. Momon couldn't understand how Yang could despise the heart of mana. Maybe there was nothing in his skull at all. However, the boy was already thinking about something else. Lich could only sense the aura of a dragon from Damien and Leon, because they are descendants of Bahamut. That's understandable, but what does the royal knight have to do with it? At that moment, someone called Jan on his old number, 974. It was Lorena and Charlie. Charlie seemed very happy to see Jan. Lorena, on the other hand, seemed the opposite. Or maybe she was just hiding it. He said he was coming from the smithy. He had his weapons repaired there as he was preparing for a mission. They hadn't wasted any time either. Although, in the boy's opinion, it looked more like shopping. Lorena began to justify herself, saying that they were only buying essentials. Most of it was food. But Jan didn't really believe that they would eat all that in one day. Charlie saw his mood and was a little upset. But then they had a good idea. She invited Jan to go shopping with them. After all, in his current state, he would never be allowed into the Beowulf estate. At first, Jan wanted to refuse, but Charlie began to radiate such an ominous energy that he immediately changed his mind. They went into a clothing store with personalized service where they select clothes to fit each person's measurements. Cruel watched everything from behind the wall of the store. In the store, Jan picked out a winter coat, gloves, and winter shoes. He chose clothes not for their beauty, but for their quality and lightness so that they would be comfortable in battle. Momon said that he was a bore. Seeing that Yang had already made his choice, Charlie invited him to look at Lorena's outfits. The first outfit was for going out in the new city. Lorena thought it was too tight. The second outfit was black and white. Charlie considered it a timeless classic. The third outfit was an unbeatable light armor, but Beowulf didn't understand why she needed a swimsuit in a cold country. She didn't want to try anything else. In her opinion, nothing fit. However, Charlie thought otherwise. She said that all the outfits were very cute and asked Jana to confirm this. He agreed, saying that everything looked good on her, but it felt strange for Lorena to wear such clothes. Charlie asked him which outfit he thought suited Lorena best. He replied that she always looked best in her uniform. She looks beautiful in all her outfits. However, her sword skills and strength are best highlighted by this uniform. Hearing this, Lorena wanted to say something but quickly changed her mind. She turned toward the exit and said she was returning to their lodgings. Charlie returned to Jan with the same ominous energy. She asked him a rhetorical question about what he was talking about. Then she ran after Lorena. Momon and Jan did not understand what had just happened, but it looked like pure madness. Charlie caught up with Lady Lorena and apologized. She thought it was all her fault. She added that men didn't understand anything, to which Lorena replied that she was not to blame, and that it was all nonsense. A pink blush was clearly visible on her cheeks. Finally, Ian ran out of the store and shouted that they would meet tomorrow at noon at the gate. Lorena didn't understand why he was saying things so loudly that could be misunderstood. John was surprised that she didn't answer and just left. Momon said that after that he wouldn't even talk to him. So they bought the clothes, and now he was worried about something else, namely where he had gone. Jan must have meant Cruel. Luna's Light is a tavern located not far from the Billion Transportation Department. Both ordinary townspeople and mercenaries flock here. The food here is cheap and tasty. Cruel sat at one of the tables, drinking and cursing everything and everyone. He was thinking about how to defeat Jan. After all, he couldn't get close to him even in his dreams. Moreover, Cruel felt that John had not yet shown his true abilities. The young man was just thinking about why John was so careful to hide his strength, when the people behind him started making a lot of noise. His nerves snapped and he yelled at them to shut up. After all, Cruel himself from the Duane family was having lunch here. He added that the rabble had no manners whatsoever. When a nobleman was eating, they weren't even allowed to breathe loudly. If they continued to make noise, he would quickly show them the difference between nobles and commoners. When he had finished and turned around, someone behind him asked what difference he would show. Let him show how noble aristocrats eat. When Cruel was about to show the person who said this what he was capable of, he saw John. Cruel began to justify himself, saying that they did not even know basic etiquette and were making a terrible noise. However, Jan said that it was none of his business. Besides, he had been through the same thing himself. Cruel did not understand what he was talking about. Then the boy explained that it was precisely this notorious difference in status that had brought Dwight here. He added that if he freed himself from his noble origins, he would become much stronger. At that moment, a huge man approached him and put his hand on his shoulder. It was Billy, the leader of the Thunderhorn mercenary. He said he had overheard the old man saying he wanted to become stronger. He offered him to join them. Carrying iron every day is what makes you stronger. Cruel told him to take his hands off him. However, he either did not hear him or decided not to obey. It was a mistake. Cruel wasn't going to repeat himself. Besides, who likes being called a weakling? One refusal, 1 second, 1 blow. And now we have a big guy lying on the floor. You shouldn't have angered Cruel. Dwight just laughed at that. This man only looks like a tough guy, but he's actually a weakling. Everyone in the tavern began to whisper. And then a whole gang of tough guys appeared out of nowhere. None of them understood how this guy dared to raise his hand against their leader. Well, Cruel didn't mind dealing with them all at once. However, he didn't have time. All these men began to call Cruel the Great and asked him to teach them how to use their muscles so well. People began to say that his noble blood was obvious because he was the first to knock out their leader with a single blow, and he was so handsome. All this simply shocked Cruel. He didn't know what to say or what to do. However, he liked it very much. Everyone immediately began to invite him to drink with them, and to bring him all the alcohol that was in the tavern. They showered him with compliments, and every time his glass was empty, they poured him more. Such treatment made him feel better. He decided to treat everyone in the tavern. Jan carried him back to the inn while he tried to get away. He claimed that he was sober, which was obviously not true. He also asked where his brother Billy was. Jan wondered when they had become brothers, since only a few hours ago he had claimed that Billy was no match for him. However, Cruel explained that Billy was a nice, good, hard-working guy, but he was surprised that all those people were praising him for simply carrying out a big man. It was strange to him that they treated him this way even though they had only met today. They were so kind to him even though he was a nobody to them. But he had never heard a word of praise from his own family. He was tormented by the question of why this was so. If only they had said something like well done or that they believed in him. Anything. At that moment, Momon appeared next to John and asked if he had put something in Cruel's drink. At first, Jan tried to pretend he didn't know what he was talking about. However, Lich said he saw Jan add something to Dwight's glass. Then he confessed that he had put crystal powder in it to cleanse him of demon blood. Judging by the reaction, it was working. Momon didn't understand why, since it was very expensive. Could it be that he had become attached to Cruel and cared so much about him? Jan replied that he simply couldn't stand by and watch people lose their free will and do evil under someone else's influence. Duke Beowulf's castle stood majestically covered with a white blanket of snow. In the middle of the huge hall stood a portal. The center of it shimmered with shades of green. The portal was guarded on all sides by knights in black armor. Here in the portal, a foot appeared, and then a whole person. A minute later, the entire detachment stood in the middle of the hall. Charlie marveled at the luxury of this castle. Lorena stood with her eyes downcast. Cruel was shivering from the cold. He couldn't believe that anyone could live in such bitter cold. The mission they had come here for was to suppress the barbarians with the support of the knights of the House of Beowulf. In these harsh conditions, people are constantly in conflict with the barbarians over fertile land. Therefore, there is always a shortage of warriors. But the main problem was whether the proud knights of the north would accept help from outsiders. However, before leaving, Lorena asked them to stop. She wanted to warn them about something. Next, they may see the most unexpected things. They need to be prepared for this. The butler of Beowulf's house approached them. He asked if they were the reinforcements sent by the special forces. He then said that he had to ask them to leave, as they were uninvited guests. The North had never asked for help. It was Count Hans Maringer, former commander of the Beowulf Knights. He was at least third in command and powerful enough to lead a knightly order in any country at that moment. It was inconceivable to Jan how such a man could retire and become a butler. Lorena stepped forward and greeted Hans. For a few seconds, there was complete silence. Then she said that these were her colleagues, and they were official representatives of a special unit. They had arrived to carry out a mission. So he should show respect and watch his words. To which he replied that she had left home smugly and now returned after several years. She was so cruel. She joined the special forces without telling anyone. She didn't even understand how worried he had been. He cried as he said all this. All the other members of the unit stood in shock. No one expected such a turn of events. At that moment, Hans noticed the wounds on his mistress's body. He began to cry even harder. That was why Lorena didn't want to come here. The butler was offended that Lorena said such harsh words because they had all been eagerly awaiting her arrival. Finally, Beowulf agreed that she had been too harsh with him. She said that his hair had completely turned gray, and she asked how he was feeling. For some reason, this made Hans cry even harder. He was so worried about the lady. After that, he invited them inside because it was quite cold. Finally, their cook would have a chance to show off his skills. He added that Beowulf would also be there soon, so they could all have lunch together. However, Lorena said she didn't want to hear anything about her father. They would finish their mission before he returned. The butler tried to convince her that she had misunderstood him, but Lorena was no longer listening. A little later, Cruel and Charlie were waiting for Lorena at the dinner table. Dwight was very annoyed that they had to wait for her. In his opinion, they were being treated like some kind of dogs. And where could Lorena be taking so long? Charlie tried to calm him down, but Cruel thought he hadn't said anything wrong. The maid interrupted their conversation. In her opinion, the boy was behaving worse than a stray dog, so she asked him to mind his manners. Cruel asked if she even knew that he was the son of Count Dwight. She replied that of course she did, since she was a maid in the Beowulf family. Charlie said that Jan had not arrived yet either. He must have had something to do. He said there was something he could only get here. At that time, Jan was in the abandoned arsenal of Duke Beowulf's castle. In his past life, the Emperor had traveled across the continent to find a single sword. Once upon a time, a dragon slayer defeated the one dragon of the beginning of time. He cut its body in two and created two divine swords. One of them fell into the hands of Bahamut after he sent the dragon slayer to the other world. The Emperor spared no effort to find the second sword that the founder had been unable to find. He paid a large sum of money to a special search party. He organized a search across the entire continent but was unable to locate it. And just when he was ready to give up, it was finally found. The sword that even the founding emperor could not find. No one would have ever thought that all this time it had been carelessly stored in an armory in the north. The dragon sword of Astalon. Astalon is the brother of the sword Kneeling, who was stabbed with it in a previous life. And now it lay like junk right in front of Jon. Now even the emperor would not be able to destroy it. But as soon as he took the sword in his hands, he heard a voice. The real iron voice of the sword. It began to glow red, and it said only one thing, that Jon was unworthy. Then it struck him with an electric shock that damaged Jon's gloves. Yang realized that Astalon was rejecting him, but that was simply impossible. It's just a damn old piece of metal, it can't talk. At that moment, Momon materialized behind him. He became curious. He said that it must be his sword that had its own consciousness and chose its own master. Sometimes it happens that a weapon itself possesses divinity, then it can choose its master. In short, it's all about Yana. It means that he's not good enough, and that's why he was rejected. But the boy was not satisfied with this turn of events. He was going to show this piece of iron all his strength. Then he used dark energy. His hand turned from human to wolf. But that wasn't enough for the sword. It began to glow red even more intensely. It literally screamed that Jan was unworthy. Yang did not give up. The boy shouted back at Astalon that he was worthy of owning it. At this time, in the castle of the Beowulf family, all the knights in black armor lined up in rows. This operation was a routine extermination of barbarians for them. But today, they could not afford to make any mistakes. Because today, Lorena Beowulf was with them, although the butler tried to dissuade her. He wanted her to wait for the head of the family, but the girl did not even want to hear about it. If Hans thought she was stupid and incapable of even fulfilling her duty, then he should stay out of her sight. She said all this out loud. In her opinion, it was not so difficult to obtain just 10 barbarian banners. But the steward did not give up. He explained that the barbarians believed that the banners represented the spirits of their ancestors. Therefore, they would defend them even at the cost of their own lives. However, he finally realized that she was not going to listen to him. Then he ordered the other members of the squad to protect her with all their might. Charlie agreed. She was full of enthusiasm, but Cruel thought that they were not her bodyguards and did not need to protect her. Charlie thanked Hans for giving them warm clothes. When Lorena heard about this, she praised the butler. Beowulf herself had already put on her uniform. It was her first mission as part of the special squad. Just as they were about to leave, they noticed that someone was missing, and then he appeared. January. His uniform was damaged and burned. He looked tired. He apologized. Solving a problem had taken longer than he had expected. Cruel began to laugh at him, at his appearance and the fact that he hadn't even had lunch. But his wedding didn't last long. A second later, he was hit in the nose. Momon added fuel to the fire. He flew over his ear and said how dirty and ugly Yang was. If the boy could, he would have punched him in the nose too. Lich suggested that he stop thinking about the sword, but Yang said he didn't have enough time. Although Astalon Kneeling's brother did not accept him, he did not consider it the end. Lorena decided to clear up the misunderstanding that she thought had arisen. She wanted to explain why she was wearing the uniform. She justified herself by saying that it was very strong and comfortable. However, Jan had no idea what she was talking about. However, seeing Beowulf's dissatisfaction, he immediately rushed to correct himself. That, of course, in battle, this uniform suited her very well. Then the girl immediately blushed. But instead of thanking him, she shouted that he was doing it again, and she turned away, leaving Jon shocked. Meanwhile, Lorena began to give orders to her army. She ordered them to open the gates. The commanders encouraged their soldiers to give their all. After all, Lady Beowulf was with them today. Cruel considered them all peasants. After all, they were making such a fuss over a bunch of barbarians. However, Jan did not think so. But nothing else could be expected from a metropolitan aristocrat. People like him are not afraid of barbarians, because the Beowulf family had protected the empire from them. But now things had changed somewhat. The barbarians had united, and, under the leadership of a powerful chieftain, had created a strong kingdom that threatened the security of the Kabalan Empire. Jan knows that very soon the king of the barbarians will make himself known. He was called the strongest man in the world, and his name was Vilega. A state union was formed from the assembled barbarians. They were a threat even to the Kabalan Empire. A powerful warrior with excellent physical abilities and unknown techniques. But the most frightening thing was his ability to recognize his enemy's techniques at a glance. This struck terror into the hearts of the Empire's knights. In the past, they spared no effort or expense to destroy him. But all attempts were in vain. Now nothing is known about his whereabouts. Jan himself does not know where Vilega might be hiding. However, he hopes that their paths will not cross. In the forest to the northwest of the Beowulf family's estate, a third detachment of knights in black armor was on the move. They were led by members of the Special Forces unit, Cruel, Jon, Charlie, and Lorena. Dwight was whining as usual. He complained that they had been walking for a long time. He was told to stop and explained that riding in such weather was even more difficult. Meanwhile, John was delighted with how white everything was, but it was quite difficult to find his bearings and keep his distance. Lorena said that perhaps the land seemed deserted to them. After all, winter lasts 200 days a year here. The land is barren and life is difficult, but there are still people who live here permanently. They are stronger and braver than anyone else, and for that, Lorena respects them. She also finds this land beautiful in its own way. Ian agreed and said that other lords could learn from her. Charlie also agreed. Behind them, soldiers began to shout that Lady Lorena was the best. She was their light and meaning in life. With her, the lands of the Beowulf family seemed wonderful. Suddenly, all the troops were ordered to be on alert. Everyone saw a red signal fire. This signal is sent by the reconnaissance group when barbarians are detected, so they should head there. Finally, something interesting is happening, said Cruel. The knight standing next to him said that he was not one for self-confidence. It was Sabo, the squad commander. He added that they would witness an extremely violent spectacle. That only made Dwight laugh. They had fought monsters like these before. It was child's play for them. Sabo didn't really believe that it would help him, but decided not to argue with Cruel. Members of the Special Forces squad who fought many monsters and underwent deadly training. They were confident that they could handle any monster and withstand any cruelty. But they were definitely not prepared for what they were about to see. It turned out to be cruelty on a whole new level. Soldiers speared defenseless residents with spears. In a tiny settlement that could hardly be called a base, a real massacre took place. All the residents begged for mercy. Many had children, but no one cared. That was when Charlie's world turned upside down. She had always believed that knights protected the weak. She believed that they were noble warriors who had sworn to draw their swords only for their lord. But now she realized that they were just demons. It was unclear who the barbarians were. Some of those standing nearby couldn't bear it and covered the girl's eyes with their hands so she wouldn't look. It was cruel. In his opinion, there was nothing for Charlie to see here. Ian noted that Dwight was keeping his cool even when he saw blood. That was good. He had learned to control his mana. Jean understood that they were all shocked, but ethnic wars had always been like this. There are no wars where armies simply meet and divide up territory on a map. There is only carnage in which everyone from the smallest to the largest is destroyed, until one side is completely wiped out. Lorena, a descendant of the Beowulf clan, cannot be unaware of this. However, knowing and seeing it with your own eyes are two completely different things. This is the burden that Lorena will have to bear in the future. That is why many doubt that she will be able to cope. A small child lay in the snow, crying beside his dead mother. Charlie saw this and wanted to help him, but Cruel understood that they must not approach. At that moment, a knight raised his weapon above him. He said that the child was lucky to die now, rather than live as a wicked barbarian. Charlie screamed with all her might for the soldier to stop. He shouldn't do that. But the knight wasn't going to listen to her. He had a duty to fulfill, and just when it seemed that all was lost, that the child was doomed, someone stopped him from cutting off the little boy's head. It was Lady Lorena. She told them to stop. They had killed everyone who was armed, so they needed to replenish their supplies and move on. She ordered the child to be spared. It was her decision. Yes, it was her decision, but the soldiers who had been taught since childhood to exterminate barbarians could not understand it. So after her words, a heavy, destructive aura emanated from the knights. They immediately began to doubt her. Lorena was unwavering in her determination. She grew up in the Beowulf family, knew how to wield a sword since childhood, and knew what war with barbarians was like. The girl was ready to bear this burden, and yet she could not endure it. This woman's clothes were too old for the northern cold, but the child was wrapped in a luxurious sack. It was this sight that touched Lorena's heart. She said she would take responsibility for the indestructible child, but in the opinion of the knights, even one surviving barbarian could pose a serious threat to the entire empire. Although she was the mistress, such decisions were not in her power. However, Lorena thought this was too much. Although he was a barbarian, he was only a baby who had done nothing wrong. Cruel tried to make them understand that they were disobeying their mistress's orders. The knights asked the guests not to interfere. But Charlie was not going to remain silent. She did not understand how they could call themselves knights after such a thing. And Dwight didn't stop either. If he allowed the child to be destroyed, it would tarnish his reputation. He wouldn't be able to sleep at night after that. Knight Baz told him to be careful with his jokes. He didn't understand how Lorena could defend a barbarian right in front of them. Maybe she doesn't understand what this means to soldiers. Their argument was only gaining momentum. Yang stood aside. He understood that the knights couldn't be persuaded. Their emotions were beyond the bounds of ethics and logic. They had shed too much blood to feel hatred, and they couldn't just talk to him about forgiveness so easily. But then, in an instant, everyone felt a wild energy. It was so strong that it frightened everyone. Everyone could feel it. Somewhere above them, a muscular man was flying at incredible speed. The knights immediately recognized him and ordered everyone to prepare for battle. It was the leader. When he landed, the force of the impact was so great that the leader crushed the ground several meters around him. His energy seemed to burn. Everyone hurried to get as far away as possible. The knights could not have imagined that they would encounter the leader. It was the fault of the scouts. One of the 20 barbarian chiefs lifted a knight by his head and asked if they were responsible. It was Haber. The knights had destroyed his entire family, his entire tribe, and so he decided to destroy them too, slowly and painfully, so that they would suffer as he was suffering now. At that moment, Lorena Beowulf appeared behind him and ordered him to stop. But just as she was about to strike him in the head, her sword broke. Now it was his turn to attack. Habor was quick, and something told him that it was better not to get hit by his blows. When he almost hit Lorena, the knights quickly stood between them to stop him. But that was probably all they could do. Their spears began to break against the thick skin of the chieftain. One of these knights was Baz. He apologized for raising his voice at her, and wishing her farewell, he left this world at the hands of the barbarian. After the night, he was already preparing to deal with Lorena. After all, he wanted the Beowulf clan to perish. But in a moment, Haber's hand was already damaged. He was surprised that someone could hurt him. It was Jan's Black Wolf, but the boy himself had no intention of stopping there. For now, it was just a scratch, but very soon he would tear his body to pieces. The leaders of the Aman tribe had tattoos called Gimin on their bodies. This was a power that had developed in barbarian tribes that did not use mana. The Gimin tattoo replaced their Dantian. The tattoos on the body helped to absorb mana directly through the skin and muscles. Yang launched the first attack. The tattoo allows for an explosive increase in physical abilities. However, Yang's attack had no effect. If martial arts skills are added to all the abilities of the body with the help of tattoos, its power becomes unimaginably destructive. Haber proved to be stronger than Yang thought. The leader himself was determined to destroy the boy. Then Cruel and Lorena decided to join the fight. However, their first attack did not achieve its goal. In addition, their swords became entangled. This was their key mistake in their joint attack. They were not yet experienced enough. Haber noticed this and immediately attacked. Lorena and Cruel managed to jump back, but their swords didn't even scratch him. It seemed like he wasn't human. Due to his unexpected attack, the Order of Knights is confused. They don't know what to do. They will have to deal with this themselves. Charlie reported that the child was safe. Then Cruel lashed out at Lorena, saying that if it weren't for her, he would have destroyed him with a single blow. After that, Dwight added that he would attack and she should cover him. However, Beowulf believed that she had the right to attack and that Cruel should cover her. They got into an argument. The boy reminded her that he had defeated her in the last training session. But Lorena believed that in a real fight, everything would be different. Jan asked them to calm down because the enemy was standing in front of them. Then they both lunged at Yan. He tried to reason with them, telling them that now was not the time for this. The enemy could attack at any moment. However, it was too late. He attacked. They had no choice but to dodge. Lauren and Cruel, without agreeing, began to attack him together from different angles. It wasn't working. They were both pretty skilled. But because they were trying to attack alone, they were actually messing things up. Charlie watched this for a moment and decided to join the battle. Jan tried to stop her, as this would only complicate matters. However, she did not listen to him. She told Lorena that she would cover her so that she could attack with full force. And indeed, with Charlie's arrival, the situation changed. Even Habur noticed this and was a little confused. The attack of the 8th rank knight was nothing special, just a simple dagger and some hidden techniques, but even this small attack stood out among the notes that had been defending their opinion all along. It united them in a score full of dissonance. In Yan's opinion, it was wonderful. He did not expect her to have such talent. He wondered why he had never heard her name in his past life and why nothing was known about her. Here, Cruel commanded that now was the time for everyone to use their full power together. They were able to damage him, and although it was insignificant, it still helped. Attacking together, they were able to break the armor on his arm. Yang did not waste any time. He flew toward Haber at breakneck speed. And he used the Amhun technique, style 15, absorption of the dark soul. Another piece of armor was broken on the other arm. The leader was impenetrable, but that wasn't all. Immediately after the first blow, Yang, without stopping, used Amhun's 15th style, reverse turn, the dark spirit technique that cuts through the sky. This attack had definitely hit its target. An ordinary person would have died in that very moment. However, this leader was no ordinary person, and so even when he fell to his knees, no one relaxed. Habur, meanwhile, realized that this could not continue, so he said that this was not the end. He pushed himself off the ground with all his might. A second later, he was gone. At first, no one understood what had happened. Then they realized that he had escaped. These barbarians have no shame. Although it was a pity that they had let him get away, the main thing was that everyone was alive. They had to go back. But only Lorena mentioned this when she noticed that Yana was missing. Haber stopped only somewhere in the mountains where there was no snow. Fortunately, it was only a scratch for him. And considering the suffering of the dead tribes, it was nothing. He had to live to avenge the tribe's anger. At that moment, someone caught his attention saying that the chief had done the right thing by running away. It was Yang. He said that if Habur had stayed a little longer, everything would have been much more complicated. So there was no shame in it. To survive is to win. He also added that he had no intention of destroying him, but he had to answer one question. The leader did not understand how this guy had managed to follow him, but he decided to listen to him. Then Yang asked if he had heard the name Vilega and if he knew anything about him. He also asked where he was now. However, the chief told him to shut up. Without waiting, he immediately attacked. He continued to tell Yan not to treat this name so lightly. He had no right to utter this name. Yan saw his attack and told the chief to prepare to die, although he had no intention of killing him. When Habur realized that the young man had no intention of fighting him, it seemed overly confident to him. Meanwhile, the barbarian was eager to send the knight to the other world. After all, he was hunting Vilega. Habur remembered the moments when Vilega had offered him to create a wonderful world together. At that moment, Yan began to utter words unknown to the chieftain, and a magical circle appeared at the tips of his fingers. The barbarian understood what was happening, but he couldn't believe that this guy possessed magic. Yang then ordered the earthen wall to rise, and indeed spikes grew out of the ground. They pierced Habur's skin, but it was nothing to him. It was surprising that this was Yan's trump card. After all, the enemy was able to remove these stones from his path in a second, with just one palm. Then he quickly reached Yan and grabbed him by the shoulder with one hand. With the other, he was about to deliver a fatal blow. However, Yan's secret trump card was not his strength. Momon appeared. He was the secret force. He cast a lightning spell, and in a second it pierced Habur, leaving a burning trail dozens of meters long. This simply could not be. The chief could not believe that he had been defeated. Meanwhile, Momon pointed out to Yan that he couldn't do without him. Lich always said that without imagination, magic was weaker. But this pathetic sorcery was beyond the pale. He didn't understand how Yan could still call himself his student after this. The boy told the monster to shut up. However, it no longer listened to him. It had not been in battle for a long time. Meanwhile, Habur apologized to the supreme leader. It seemed that he would not be able to keep the oath he had made to the barbarian. Momon, meanwhile, continued to laugh at Yang for having difficulty with some barbarian. However, Yan said that this was not just any barbarian. He was a strong opponent. Before his end, Habur wondered why their tribe had to die like this. They just wanted to survive. After thinking for a moment, Yang said that Beowulf was probably also fighting with all his might to survive in battle against such a strong opponent. The chief thought it was a joke. After all, the boy had defeated him and now he was calling him strong. However, Yang was serious. Habur was a strong and worthy warrior. Then the barbarian asked if he could grant him one request. He had seen how they had taken the child. This child was the last of his tribe, so he asked for mercy. Jan told him not to worry. Considering who had taken him under his wing, he would not live as a slave. Then Habur handed him the symbol of the chief and told him to take it. It would be proof of their promise. This object turned out to be a bone bracelet. It was the symbol of the chief. Receiving it meant that the person had inherited his will. Yang was not obliged to fulfill the oath given to a man who would soon die. However, he did not want to break his promise, so he accepted the bracelet. Then Haber smiled and departed for the next world, at least in good spirits. Standing over the dead man, Yang wished that in his next life he would be born in a good place. At that time, the knights were rejoicing in Duke Beowulf's castle. They all believed that they had done a good job. They had neutralized 2 enemy bases and succeeded in defeating the leader Haber. In their opinion, this achievement belonged not to one person, but to all of them who had shed blood. So let's raise our glasses. No one should leave here sober and on their feet today. All this was proclaimed loudly by William, the commander of the Black Knights. And everyone happily raised their glasses to Beowulf. Among them were Cruel and Jan. Only Lorena was not happy. She stood hidden behind large barrels and thought about what had happened. Then the commander of the knights approached her. He asked if she was all right. He said that she was very brave for defeating the leader of the barbarians. She wanted to argue that it was not her doing. However, he interrupted her. He suggested that she bring him all the remaining relics of the tribe. She refused, saying that she couldn't do that. Then he thought that the mistress was sad because of the death of Beza. It seemed that she was not used to such situations. However, she should not be sad. They were knights of the north, warriors of the Beowulf family. Those who do not know them say that they are noble and honest, but they are men who fight with swords in their hands. People who became knights to die in battle. So Baz is undoubtedly satisfied. He fell with honor defending Beowulf in the face of the enemy. William also wants to die for Lorena, but he is too strong for that, so he envies Baz. After that, the commander started talking about the child that Lorena had brought. Since the mistress brought him herself, he will turn a blind eye. Lorena is already rejoicing. But instead, he told her not to dare get attached to him, considering him a beast. After all, he was just an animal.